A boy opens his eyes and sees several cute maids excited to see him. His totally normal first response is to cast a fireball and incinerate them all, but just before he does so, he realizes that his hands are tiny. That brief moment of distraction throws his aim off, so he misses the maid and instead ends up blowing a hole through the castle walls instead. Fortunately, thanks to the fact that a fireworks show was going on, his blast did not cause a terror alert in the kingdom. The people are celebrating the birth of the new Prince Lloyd, while inside the castle, the maids are beginning to consider switching careers before they get turned to ash by this trigger-happy baby. Some time passes and we see that the maids decided to keep their jobs, but only after updating their life insurance policy. Right now, they are busy looking for the prince and can't find him anywhere, but moments after they leave, Prince Lloyd pops out from behind a pillar. He wants to get as far away from here so they don't find him, but as he was leaving, he ends up bumping into some officials. He asks them not to tell the maids he is here and they agree, but one asks if Lloyd would like to join them for some hunting to pass the time. Unfortunately, he is pretty busy right now, so he ignores the offer and just runs off to do his own thing. The official is disheartened that he was rejected by Lloyd again, but the other guy asks why he is even bothering to try making friends with the kid since he is too young to contest for the crown. Plus, he is only the 7th prince, so gaining his friendship won't be politically advantageous. To this, the first official has one thing to say. The kid could blow up a castle on the day he was born, and I don't think he needs another reason to stay on friendly terms with him. In fact, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that Lloyd may be the reincarnation of the father of sorcery, but that's only speculation. Back to Lloyd, he is indeed a reincarnation, although he was just a regular sorcerer in his past life. He doesn't know why he remembers his last life, why he is reborn as a prince here, or whose bright idea it was for him to wear this outfit. One thing he does know is that since he has the freedom to do so, he will live the same way he lived in his past life, and spend it all researching all kinds of wonderful magic. He is mesmerized by the castle's extensive library collection, and thinks it is even better than the one he had access to in his previous life. However, just before he could open a book and start reading, he gets it snatched away by a maid. Silpha has finally found him, so he can no longer skip the rest of his lessons as he pleases. Outside, Lloyd now has to go through sword practice with Silpha, and she is showing no mercy against this 8-year-old, but he's still holding his ground. Lloyd doesn't see a reason why he needs to go through with all this training since he is too far down the line to ever have a shot at the royal throne, but Silpha retorts that there is more to life than just trying to gain power in the family. It's only proper that since he is a member of the royal family, that he should be educated in all manners of subjects. She was put in charge of his education 3 years ago, so she's going to take her job very seriously and make sure he learns stuff. Lloyd doesn't like how insistently diligent Silpha is, but he knows she won't let him skip out on practice until he shows her some improvement. She tells him to get back into stance, and the two cross swords once more. However, this time, Lloyd is able to match Silpha's moves exactly. She is impressed by the amount of improvement he is exhibiting since she can see that he has gotten better, but Lloyd thinks to himself that he is actually using something called control-type magic to copy her moves exactly. In other words, he's cheating on his swordsmanship exam. However, even with him copying her movements, he's still only got the body of an 8-year-old, so she is stronger, taller, and has more reach than him as well. He's going to have to find a way to make up for the differences, since they put him at a huge disadvantage, so he comes up with a brilliant solution. He's going to cheat some more. He casts a spell to make his wooden sword grow longer, and another one to make him physically stronger, as well as one to make him levitate, so now he is able to fight on equal terms with Silpha. Eventually, when he sees an opening, he switches tactics and stops copying her technique in the middle of his attacks, so she is thrown off guard and he plans to take advantage of that to strike. However, she's still an extremely skilled swordswoman, so she was able to block his strike regardless. She confronts him about cheating just now, and Lloyd is scared that he got caught. She assumes he must have done it to make up for the difference in ability between the two of them. And honestly, she's pretty impressed by it. That means he must have been using 2 spells at once, and even the palace court mages find that difficult to do, so it's a really advanced skill. Lloyd is just happy that she didn't scold him for using magic, but he chooses to leave out the fact that he was actually using 4 different spells at once instead of just 2. Later that evening, it is time for Lloyd to take a bath, but unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you think about it, he is forced to take his bath while sitting in the lap of Silpha in the maid's bathroom. He finds this whole situation to be incredibly embarrassing, but Silpha refuses to let him leave and bathe himself since last time she did that, he couldn't even shower and spent all his time reading instead. My guy just wants to read some books, but instead he's surrounded by so many Opie that he doesn't know what to do. One of the other maids warns him that if he doesn't behave himself, then he'll be taken by the demon of the Forbidden Library. Lloyd had never heard of this Forbidden Library or the demon in it, so the girls recount the whole story. Long ago, the kingdom of Saloon was nearly destroyed completely. However, after the sacrifices of countless mages, they managed to seal the demon away inside a book. The name of this demon was Grimoire, and he is supposedly sealed away in the castle's Forbidden Library. Silpha doesn't believe the story is true, and she is sure Lloyd wouldn't be scared by something as silly as that. However, Lloyd is fighting his own demons after being surrounded by so many girls in the bath, so he can't bring himself to look them in the eye. They misunderstand this and think he must actually be scared of their story, so they start offering to let him sleep in their beds tonight if he wants to. Lloyd manages to slip away while they argue over who gets to stay with him. And now that he knows there is a forbidden library, he can't just not explore it. That night, Lloyd sneaks through the castle halls until he finds the corridor that should lead to the forbidden library. He then proceeds to cast an air spell on himself to conceal his presence. It changes the density of the air around him and causes light to refract around him, making him practically invisible. One of the guards is falling asleep, but the other tells him to stay awake since they are meant to be guarding magic that could potentially destroy the kingdom in the wrong hands, as well as a sealed demon. All the while, Lloyd is walking past them as they talk about how good they are at their guard duty. They are definitely getting fired after this, aren't they? There was still a second layer of protection in place to stop people from getting into the library though, and it is a seal that was cast by 10 powerful mages using their strongest sealing magic, so there should be no way anyone is getting through that. Well, it didn't take much for him to get through it, so I guess the mages are getting fired as well. After Lloyd has made it into the library, he is amazed that despite living here his entire life, he has never once seen this place. He starts looking around at all the interesting books available, but he reminds himself that he has to replace that barrier so people don't lose their jobs because of him. Just then, he sees a book fly out from a pile, and out pops the demon, Grimoire. He is impressed that such a young boy managed to break the seal on the door to the library, so he tries to persuade him into unsealing him as well. However, even if he doesn't, the seal on Grimoire is probably just going to collapse on its own since it has degraded over time. Grimoire tries to bribe Lloyd with some gold nuggets, but Lloyd isn't fooled by his words. This gold is made from creation magic, and on top of that, Grimoire made this stuff really poorly. He also tells Grimoire that he'll be redoing that seal once he is done here. The kingdom has a lot of books he can read, so he can't let something like Grimoire possibly destroy it all. Grimoire tries convincing him by promising that he won't destroy the kingdom, but Lloyd isn't falling for it. As a last attempt, he says he'll teach Lloyd some ancient magic if he releases him, and Lloyd is immediately ready to throw the entire kingdom under the bus if it means he can learn more magic. He asks if Grimoire will really teach him some ancient magic, and realizing he's got the kid hooked, Grimoire tells him that he definitely will. He also tries buttering him up by saying he must be really talented with sorcery. This brings back some painful memories from Lloyd's past life, where he was discarded for his lack of magical talent, but that's changed since he now has the body of a member of the royal family. He creates a magic key and uses it to destroy the book that was holding Grimoire, and once he is free, he can't believe Lloyd actually destroyed the seal just like that. Lloyd is still excited to get his ancient magic lesson from Grimoire, so he asks for the lesson to begin. Grimoire takes a look at him and proceeds to chuck a ball of purple fire at him, calling it Lesson 1. He believes that must have killed Lloyd, so he's about to get out of here and go destroy the world or something. But then Lloyd pops out from the smoke, completely unharmed. Grimoire can believe that Lloyd is still alive after taking a direct hit from his spell, and Lloyd is praising it for being so unique. He would love to see some more, and Grimoire just can't accept that Lloyd survived, so he starts firing off many more spells at him. However, not a single one manages to break through the barrier around Lloyd, so Grimoire is confused how his barrier could be so powerful. Lloyd is watching in amazement as he analyzes the spell, but even though he knows it could possibly kill him, he wants to see what it feels like to take the attack with his body. Lloyd opens up a hole in the barrier and takes a bit of the purple fire in, much to the shock of Grimoire. It burns his finger really badly, but he seems to enjoy it regardless. And this is the moment we find out that Lloyd is seriously messed up in the head. He tells Grimoire to show him something else, and not wanting to lose to a child, Grimoire pulls out his trump card and grows his second spell so he can dual cast his magic. And although this would have annihilated anyone who wasn't the main character, Grimoire is getting worse matchups than Jogo did. Once Grimoire sees that Lloyd has effortlessly canceled out his most powerful spell, he gets the message that he cannot handle this kid in a fight, so he tries to get away from him as fast as possible. However, just as he was about to leave, he crashed into the barrier Lloyd had set up around them ahead of time. The castle is right above the library, so he didn't want them finding out he was down here. Grimoire asks if Lloyd thought he was going to try and run away, but that's not it. A long time ago, he made a mistake that raised everyone's life insurance, so he likes to be extra careful when he's using magic. He also put barriers up around all the books so that they wouldn't get burned up. But just when Grimoire was about to try throwing another magic spell, Lloyd stops him and says that he has seen enough of that one already. Now he wants to see what kind of defensive magic Grimoire can use, so he uses one of his own attack spells. It's safe to say that Grimoire is not going to enjoy this, and after the blast has ended, we see him laying on the floor as a defeated demon. Lloyd comes up to him and asks why he didn't use a barrier to defend himself, but nothing Grimoire could do would have saved him from that attack. Afterwards, Lloyd uses some magic to return the room back to normal, and Grimoire has been thoroughly tamed from his experience with Lloyd. He tells Lloyd that he is an amazing mage, but Lloyd thinks he is the one who is amazing since it turns out that demons can't be killed by magic, although it still hurts a lot. Lloyd is interested to find out just how much punishment Grimoire can take since he is supposedly immune to magical damage, but Grimoire doesn't want to agree to that, so he pledges his undying loyalty to Lloyd on the condition that he doesn't torture him. Lloyd agrees to take him on as a familiar, but torture will still be involved. Only slightly though. He tells Grimoire to transform so he doesn't scare people with the way he looks, so he turns into this chibi-looking goat and plans to butter him up so he can take control of his body. However, when Grim tries to do so, he ends up staring into the bottomless pit that is Lloyd's mana reserves. This made it clear to him that nothing he tries against this kid will work, so he is better off just being obedient and not causing trouble. With all that settled, Lloyd heads off to enjoy reading in the Forbidden Library as much as he wants. While still enjoying his reading session, Lloyd receives a visitor in the library which Grim alerts him to. He doesn't think much of it and just tells Grim to hide since he doesn't want anyone seeing him. But once the man speaks to him, Lloyd perks up because it turns out that it's his big brother Albert. Lloyd accompanies Albert for his daily training, so he, as well as a couple servants, all stand around as he gets ready to fire a spell at some targets. Albert casts a little flame spell so he can fire at the target, and while it's just a little one, size isn't all that matters. He uses his spell to strike the target dead center, so everyone gives him a round of applause. Grim asks Lloyd if Albert is really the second prince of the kingdom of Saloum, and Lloyd confirms as much. While he is no main character, he is decently capable physically, as well as being pretty smart, so it's not strange that people consider him a good candidate to succeed the throne. With the authority he possesses, he is allowed access to various facilities within the castle to keep his skills sharp, and sometimes he invites Lloyd to join in. It's one of the few occasions where Lloyd is permitted to cast attack spells within the castle, so he never passes up the opportunity. However, he wants nothing to do with the succession of the throne, so he can't be doing anything too fancy lest he gets dragged into the battle. Lloyd fires all his shots and barely grazes the target each and every time, which makes the brown-nosing noble look down on him for not being able to hit the targets. However, Albert won't be so easily fooled by Lloyd's facade of incompetence. He tells Lloyd that he wants to take a little break, so he is giving him free rein to do whatever he wants on the shooting range while he is gone. Lloyd is excited to get the whole shooting range to himself for once since there are a bunch of new magic spells he would love to try, like the double incantation thing Grim did when he was fighting Lloyd. Grim pauses for a moment and tells Lloyd that it's impossible for him to pull that truck off since it's something that only demons can do because they can grow a second mouth. Lloyd realizes he is right, so he comes up with a solution to the problem. He's just got to absorb Grim into his body and grow an extra mouth on his hand, no big deal. Grim is obviously shocked by the series of events that caused him to end up as a 10-year-old boy's hand, but he's just going to accept that Lloyd is crazy enough to try anything once. Since he now has a second mouth, Lloyd is ready to begin double casting a spell, so he asks Grim if he'll be able to follow along. Grim is confident in his spellcasting abilities, so he says he's ready to begin at any time, and they begin casting their spells in sync. However, Grim quickly realizes that he isn't built for the kind of exploits Lloyd's brain is running on. He asks what the hell Lloyd was just doing, but Lloyd is confused since he was just doing some basic spell stacking. Spell stacking is the process of abbreviating an incantation by adding in several other incantations to shorten the cast time. However, what Lloyd was doing was layering hundreds of spells on top of each other at once when normal spell stacking is done with 2 or 3 spells max. Grimm didn't sign up for this, so he backs out of the double casting agreement, and since he doesn't want to do it, Lloyd just decides to handle it himself. He takes over Grimm's mouth and is now able to speak out of both his own and Grimm's, so he begins the double casting again. Grimm doesn't like the idea of having his mouth used against his will, but it's not like he has much of a choice since Lloyd has already begun casting his spell. Lloyd is combining different spells like he's the Honored One, and even though he knows damn well that what he's about to do isn't safe, he's got to try this spell out on something. He gets ready to fire it off and simultaneously raise the insurance premiums on the entire castle. The blast is seen all the way over in town, but back with Albert and the Brown Nosers, they begin asking him why he chooses to give Lloyd so much attention when they don't think he is talented enough to warrant such treatment. Albert tells them that they must be blind to have not noticed the way Lloyd was shooting at the targets. Grazing a target once could be a mistake, but doing the exact same thing 10 times in a row, that is a choice. He knows Lloyd is a prodigy and may one day grow up to be a grand sage, so paying attention to him is not wasted effort and could even be of great benefit to him at some point in the future. Although at his core, Albert just wants to get along with his little brother, which is why he let him have the range to himself so he can practice for real. The Brown Nosers still don't think Lloyd could accomplish much at his age, but as he looks outside, he starts wondering why it's nighttime in the middle of the day. Over at the shooting range, Lloyd has just blown up the sky. That's just something he can do now. But it would cause serious problems for him if the sky just permanently had a hole in it because of him, so he starts freaking out and trying to get it to go back to normal. Thankfully, the sky goes back to normal after a moment, so Lloyd thinks everything should be fine. However, by the next day, conspiracy theories have already been made regarding the mysterious hole that appeared in the sky the day before. Lloyd is more intrigued by the other article in the newspaper, so he checks it out, and it talks about an A-ranked adventurer party that managed to clear a really difficult dungeon and gather treasure, including a bunch of magical items. As soon as he saw that, Lloyd decided that it was time for him to head into the dungeon without thinking twice, but Grimm had to pull him back because it's obviously a terrible idea for Lloyd to just disappear from the castle randomly and head off to a dungeon. People are going to go crazy looking for him, but Lloyd has a plan to take care of that as well. He just needs to make them think he is still here, so he pulls out an acorn and casts a plant spell to make a replica of himself from it. Once the spell is complete, a perfect copy of Lloyd's body is formed down to the smallest details, and thanks to the different materials used, it feels the exact same way as regular skin and bone, plus Lloyd can make it move the same way he normally would. Grimm thinks a copy like this might actually allow Lloyd to leave the castle unnoticed, but Lloyd says otherwise, since if this worked perfectly, he would have been using the spell already. The problem here is Sylpha, since she is so obsessed with Lloyd that the other day, while he was reading on his bed, she was able to tell that he had grown an extra 0.07 millimeters, which is creepy in its own weird way. Lloyd is sure that he won't be able to fool her with a brain-dead copy like this, but he's got another plan for that, which is where Grimm comes into play. Lloyd slips out of the castle undetected, so as he is flying away, he calls back to Grimm to get a report on how things are going in the castle. Grimm answers, saying he can hear Lloyd loud and clear, as well as get good visuals through one eye, and as far as standing in as Lloyd's replacement, Grimm is pretty sure he is doing alright. At least the regular maids can't seem to tell the difference yet, but he can't get over the fact that Lloyd didn't even hesitate to rip Grimm's soul from his body and put it inside the wooden copy. Then he took Grimm's body and reabsorbed it into his body so they could maintain communication. Since everything seems to be going well, Lloyd tells Grimm to keep pretending to be him but to keep an eye out for Sylpha and avoid her at all costs. Grimm takes some time to admire the craftsmanship of Lloyd because this body is pretty much the same as the real thing, even complete with a mana-circulation system. Just then, he realizes that with Lloyd out of the castle, he is free to cause as much mayhem as he wants, but he forgets that he is still on speaker. Lloyd ignores the obviously evil laugh he just heard and tells Grimm that he appreciates the help and is counting on him to keep suspicion down. Grimm is touched by the fact that Lloyd actually trusts him, so tears begin to stream down both of his faces. Lloyd asks if there's something wrong, but Grimm just tells him not to worry about it and to just come back as soon as he is done. However, Lloyd realizes that although he went through all this trouble to get out of the castle without getting noticed, he doesn't actually know where any dungeons are. As he tries to figure out what to do from here, he looks down and notices a girl being chased by a group of orcs, but he decides to watch to see what happens rather than intervening. The girl was running really fast, but don't mistake her running away for weakness because in a split second, The girl takes a deep breath and turns around before drop-kicking one orc in the stomach so hard that she has to dig herself out of its guts. She then launches herself in the direction of another 2 orcs, which are killed as soon as her kicks connect with their faces. Finally, one more orc tries to get her from behind, but she performs a technique which instantly turns the last one into an assortment of monster parts flying in the sky. She stands victorious over the orc corpses in the most glorious of camera angles, and Grimm recognizes that she must be a martial artist, and Lloyd is intrigued to see what she can do since he knows about foreign countries that use energy called chi to fight. Now that she is done with the orcs, the girl addresses the person hiding over on the mountain because she noticed that she was being watched. Since he has been spotted, Lloyd wants to head down to talk to her so he can ask her about Chi, but Grimm stops him and points out that it would be really bad if she saw him since he would easily be recognized as the 7th Prince. Lloyd realizes Grimm is right, so he just chooses not to come out, but that plan backfires because the girl takes the silence to mean whoever is watching her is an enemy. She then proceeds to run up the mountain, so Lloyd is panicking since he doesn't want her to find out his true identity. As she lands on top of the mountain, she finds Lloyd, who has transformed himself into an older version of himself. He introduces himself as a rookie adventurer named Robert, and the girl is completely starstruck. Lloyd had used illusion magic to change his appearance, but transformation spells are all limited to people whom you have seen before, so in order to hide his identity, he used double casting to combine an illusion of himself with one of Robert, thereby creating a new person which probably still looks like someone from the royal family, but it's the best he could do. The girl introduces herself as Tao and says she's a B-ranked adventurer, so Lloyd and Grimm assume she doesn't suspect anything. The reason Tao suspects nothing is because her brain turned to must after seeing Lloyd. In her 18 years of life, she has never had a boyfriend before, so she left the dojo hoping to meet someone. However, it turns out that most guys don't actually want their head crushed between her thick thighs, so she's been out of luck in the dating market. However, since fate has brought her a hot guy, she will make sure he becomes her boyfriend. Robert tries to get away by saying he wants to go clear a dungeon, but Tao immediately offers to join him, so the two head there together. In the dungeon, Tao is killing monsters left and right, all to impress Robert with how strong her thighs are, but he is more interested in the random rocks on the ground than he is in her. They continue through the dungeon, and Robert asks why she chooses to adventure alone, so she answers that she hasn't been able to find any good party members due to the lack of candidates in the hot guy category, but Robert fits her criteria perfectly. They sit down to share a meal, so Robert takes the opportunity to ask Tao about the chi she had used earlier. She is surprised he knows about it since people in this country generally have no idea about anything other than magic. Robert knows it is greatly dependent on the way you breathe, and Tao adds that chi training is entirely based on breathing techniques. It allows you to circulate the chi in your body and reach physical heights that normally wouldn't be possible. Lloyd begins trying to copy what he had seen Tao do earlier, and after just a few moments of practicing, he is able to feel the chi circulating in his body, although he nearly blows up his lungs because his body isn't used to the force. Tao can't believe he was able to copy the technique just by seeing her use it a couple of times, but she warns him that it's really dangerous to attempt this kind of thing if your body hasn't been trained to handle it. However, she has no idea how little Robert cares for his well-being as long as he can learn something interesting from the experiment. Since he seems really set on learning about chi, she offers to teach him a thing or two since they are together anyway. But once Robert thanks her, her heart skips a beat, so she tries to calm down by instructing Robert to keep the chi breathing up constantly. And the whole time, Grimm is just watching things play out, knowing Tao is getting catfished by a 10-year-old. Grimm enjoys his time by living the relaxed life Lloyd refuses to indulge in, but things take a worrying turn once Silpher shows up. Back to the dungeon, Tao has just used a chi blast to defeat the dungeon boss, and now that that's done, the treasure chest precariously placed in the center of the open room unlocks. Robert is intrigued by the mechanism the chest uses to detect whether the wolf has been defeated or not, and Tao is growing even more infatuated with him by the minute, especially since she sees that he is strong enough to learn chi breathing on his first try, so if she keeps the relationship going, there's no way her grandpa can reject him as her future husband. Robert calls her back over so they can open the chest together, but once it is opened, a slash is aimed right at Tao, which Robert notices in time to drag her out of the way. The slash was caused by the dungeon's hidden boss, the Lich, and Robert is excited to see what it can do. Tao is terrified of the Lich, but when Robert asks about the monster, she acts as if everything is fine and tells him he should leave the dungeon without her. He protests, saying he wanted to stay and watch the battle, but without saying another word, Tao gets close to him and hits him with a strike that blows him out of the boss room. It makes no sense for a lich to be hidden in a low-level dungeon like this, since they are so powerful that even A-rank adventurers have trouble dealing with them. She may not be able to win, but she at least wishes to buy enough time for Robert to escape. Meanwhile, Robert is currently flying back through the tunnel after Teo's strike, but he is disappointed since he had a lot more he wanted to learn about Qi from her. He creates a magic barrier to stop him from flying back, but even if Tao wanted him to leave so badly, she could have at least given him a map or something because Robert is completely lost. He tries contacting Grimm, but he gets radio silence from him, aside from a message begging him to get home soon because he is in trouble. Meanwhile, Tao is still fighting the Lich and she seems to be holding her own, but with the damage she is taking, sooner or later she's going to end up losing. She really doesn't want to die, but she takes solace in the fact that she helped Robert get away. She then tries slowly backing away to see if she can escape as well, but as she tries this, the Lich starts talking. It recognizes the martial arts she uses and says it has eaten someone with a similar technique before, but after gaining that person's knowledge, he realized that Qi is nothing more than an inferior version of magic, so he sees no point in eating Tao to learn about it. But Robert, on the other hand, seemed quite intriguing, so he would have loved to take a bit out of him. This isn't the first time Tao has heard someone insult her Qi martial arts, as most people on this continent just think of it as a useless technique. But when Robert saw it, he actually thought it was impressive, so that made her happy. The Lich doesn't get why she is telling him this or why she would think he cares, but Tao is done talking. She takes a deep breath and charges at the Lich with all the strength she can muster. Even if the Lich raises a barrier, she doesn't stop pounding away. She has been training her body to use Qi for her entire life, giving up her precious time and never getting the chance to have a boyfriend, so she's not going to let him insult the technique. She unleashes a full-power Qi blast at point-blank range, which breaks through the Lich's barrier and sends it flying back into a wall. Unfortunately, using that much Qi also left her body completely exhausted, so she can barely move at all now. However, the Lich wasn't defeated by her attack and even found it rather pitiful for an ultimate attack. All the Qi she could gather in her body is ultimately inferior to even a single finger's worth of his own magic, so he tells her that she's gonna die now. The Lich brings down a magic slash, but instead of killing, the slash cracks and falls apart as Robert has returned and put up a barrier. He says if Tao is done fighting already, then he'd like to give it a shot, but he's got to get home soon, so he'll have to make it quick. She is surprised to see him back here again, and even more so when she sees the deranged look in his eyes, so she just stays silent. The Lich begins casting a spell, so Robert does the same and immediately disappears from view, dashing along the walls and appearing behind the Lich. He takes a deep breath with the technique Tao taught him, but his body still isn't used to it, so he breaks a few ribs in the process. The Lich casts another attack spell, but Robert still needs more time to think, so he pulls up a barrier to stop the Lich from hitting him and starts reflecting deeply on what he needs to do to complete his new technique. The Lich can't believe someone could make a barrier so strong that it deflects all his attacks, but Robert isn't even thinking about the barrier, and instead is trying to figure out how to combine both Qi and mana. He recalls something Tao had said about focus being very important, so he resolves to focus more on his breathing. He draws air into his lungs and simultaneously casts a full sprint air spell to refine their combination. Because he starts moving, the Lich gets full of himself and believes Robert must be fleeing since he can't win, so he sends more attacks his way. Meanwhile, Robert is still trying to take deeper breaths, but the barrier is getting in the way, so he has to get rid of it. The Lich once again misunderstands and thinks his attacks finally broke through the barrier, so he is now certain that he must be more powerful than Robert. Robert grabs onto a stalactite and is finally able to get enough airflow to properly combine his mana and Qi, so after jumping around for a bit and breathing, he's finally able to mix them together and create a balance. With this newly acquired technique, he is able to counter the Lich's magic slashes, although he is far weaker than he would have liked it to be. To compensate for the weakness, he makes the energy thinner and stronger so it will reach the Lich. The Lich casts more attack spells to intercept Robert's attacks, but as time goes on, the attacks coming from Robert become more potent and plentiful, but he isn't even casting a spell for it, so that must mean his attacks are Qi-based. The Lich can't believe he is being overwhelmed by a technique as rudimentary as Qi, but Robert keeps piling on without pause. He continues making the slashes thinner and sharper until he finally perfects the technique. The Lich sees what's coming and gives up on counterattacking, so he pulls up a barrier and attempts to tank the hit. However, with his perfected technique, Robert is able to cleave right through the Lich and his barrier as well as the cave they are in. After that, Tao is even more in love with him than before, so as they prepare to leave, they check the chest to see what they went through all this trouble for and find nothing but a rusty old dagger. It doesn't seem like it's worth anything, but Robert thinks he might be able to do something with it. After the treasure is taken, the chest begins to sink into the ground, but while Robert is confused, Tao tells him that it's perfectly normal since this always happens. The dungeon falls apart after the treasure is taken, so Robert realizes it must be part of a survival mechanism, so the chest must be something like the dungeon's core. He immediately tries to grab it out of the ground since it seems interesting, but the dungeon is collapsing around them, so after he gets the chest out, they leave. Outside, Tao says she is surprised that Robert used Chi to fight at the end instead of magic since he is a mage, so she was wondering if he wanted to prove that Chi is a viable technique. But that's not it. He just thought it would be fun to try it out. Just then, he remembers that he needs to get home soon since Grimm is in trouble, so he gets ready to fly away. Before he leaves, Tao reflects on what happened and knows Robert was able to figure out a technique called Chi Blade on his own in such a short amount of time, so she has to become better so she can keep his attention and hopefully get him to be her boyfriend. Robert agrees to this sentiment, but as he is flying off, Tao realizes she never got to ask him for his contact info, so she'll probably never see him again. Robert undoes the illusion spell to go back to being Lloyd, and after a short cross-country flight, he is returned to the castle and starts looking for Grimm to make sure he's alright. But he is totally not alright. After Sylvia caught him, he was forced to do sword training, but since he only uses magic, his sword skills are incredibly lacking, so Sylvia thought Lloyd was getting soft and made the training even harder on him. Later, after Grimm has psychologically recovered, Lloyd shows him the knife he got from the dungeon and Grimm can't believe he had to endure Sylvia's beating because of a stupid knife. Lloyd apologizes again but tells him that the knife may actually be pretty valuable since it's special. He dips it in a bit of hot water and starts scraping away at it until he literally peels the magic off it. As he suspected, the knife has been treated with magical essence, the same stuff that is used as a catalyst for enchantment, which involves writing magic formulas onto a weapon to strengthen them. In the case of the knife, the enchantment placed on it was one called Boost Power. After peeling off all the enchantment stickers, he places them in a beaker and shakes them vigorously to get rid of all the old enchantments. Lloyd would like to research enchantments, but since this is all the mana essence that was used on the knife, and the mana essence is really hard to come by, he doesn't have many opportunities to learn by trial and error. If an enchantment he tries fails, then both the mana essence and weapon will go to waste, which is why he has a better idea in mind. Instead of just using the mana essence here, he'll analyze it using magic so he can make his own. He uses a purification spell which breaks down objects into their base elements, so with it, he is able to find out that the mana essence is made of oil, silver, and something called hematite. But even if he knows that hematite is pretty hard to come by as well since it is made from crushing monster cores, but that shouldn't be a problem for Lloyd since he happened to snag the core of the dungeon so he can make hematite from that. Now all they need is oil, silver, and a bunch of weapons to test out enchantments on. Lloyd goes to meet his father and asks him for some spending money, so the king just pulls out a bag of silver coins to give him since he loves his son. Although he finds it strange that Lloyd wanted silver instead of gold coins, but he doesn't question it. He wonders how Lloyd is going to use his allowance, and we see exactly how he plans to use it as he starts melting knockdown with Grimm. Later, Lloyd is fighting with Sylvia again and uses some new tricks to try and get an edge on her, but even after using full sprint, she is still able to keep up with his movements. He takes it a step further and uses magic to make the ground uneven so he can get the drop on her. But once he goes in for a strike, he finds that Sylvia has disappeared, but he is unaware that she is simply hiding inside the dirt construct he made, so he gets obliterated. Sylvia won the battle, but she still gave Lloyd the oil he wanted even though the agreement was that he needed to be able to land a hit on her to get it. She says it is fine since she is just relieved that his poor performance last time they fought was just a fluke. Lloyd is grateful and promises to show her what he makes once he is done, but Sylvia assumes he's cooking something. After returning to his experiment room, Lloyd and Grimm add the oil to the rest of the ingredients, allowing them to make the mana essence. Now, all they need is a bunch of weapons to test the enchantment out on, so Lloyd goes to Albert to ask for his assistance in acquiring some. Since Albert has a bunch of loyal knights under his command, Lloyd was hoping that he would get them to allow him to enchant their weapons, and since Albert asked them to do it, all the knights immediately hand over their weapons to him. But they don't have much confidence in Lloyd being able to get it right, so they silently cry over their lost swords. Grim is a little upset that the knights think Lloyd is going to mess up the enchantment, so he is even more determined to get this right on the first try. Lloyd starts in on the first sword and absolutely fills every inch of space available. However, he soon finds out that regular steel isn't able to handle that much enchanting as the sword shatters to pieces. He keeps trying and swords keep breaking until he eventually manages to get some of them to work. Then by the next morning, Lloyd goes to show Albert his achievement, and he is shocked that out of 120 swords, Lloyd actually managed to successfully enchant 50 of them. Even he thought that Lloyd would just destroy all the swords, but as he inspects them, he is amazed by what he sees. The best enchanters only have a success rate of about 10%, so Lloyd having a 40% success rate is outstanding. One of the guards doesn't believe Lloyd actually accomplished what he claims to have done, but when he tries to sheath his sword, the sword ends up being too sharp for it due to Lloyd's enchantments. Albert is taking a look at one of Lloyd's best enchanted swords when Lloyd comes up to him and asks if he can see how the swords perform in combat, so Albert invites him out to join him for a monster hunt he has to go on. After making preparations for the next day, Lloyd, Albert, and Silpha all head out in a carriage at the break of dawn, and they have soon made their way into the forest surrounding the kingdom. Lloyd asks if the monsters are close by yet, but Silpha has to inform him that it's going to take a little longer since they need to make it to the lake first. Silpha turns to Albert and thanks him for allowing her to accompany Lloyd on this expedition, but he saw no reason why she shouldn't be allowed to join. Plus, he knows how much she loves Lloyd, so he wouldn't want to keep her away from him. Silpha may have inappropriate feelings for Lloyd, but she won't admit that at least until he turns 18. Albert continues teasing her a little more, but when Silpha draws her sword, he realizes he may have crossed a line and stops talking. However, the sword draw was not because of his teasing, but rather because they got some uninvited guests to deal with. These are kobolds which have armed themselves with steel weapons, so the knights get into formation and prepare to defend Lloyd and Albert with everything they have. Lloyd has to act like he's scared to not draw attention to himself, but the truth is that he already knew the kobolds were coming long before they arrived. During his time with Tau, she had taught him an application of Chi that allows him to sense his surroundings at all times as long as he keeps his breathing going, which is pretty handy for exploration. The knights are about to begin fighting, so Lloyd pays close attention as one of the knights slashes a kobold. The knight, the kobold, and the horse were not prepared for what happened next because the kobold is split in half like a stick of butter. It makes no sense to them how their weapons are able to cut through the kobolds so cleanly when they are wearing steel armor, but it's all due to the success of Lloyd's enchantments. The swords are now so sharp that even these trained knights are scared to handle them. Albert has nothing but praise for Lloyd and his amazing enchanting skills, so he gives him a lot of head pats. Silpha also praises Lloyd's enchanting skills, although her weapon wasn't enchanted to begin with, but it doesn't look like that stopped her from decimating kobolds anyway. Just then, a kobold goes straight for Lloyd, which he is aware of, but before it gets too close and forces him to act, the kobold is kicked away by a familiar face, Tau. She sensed a hot guy in the area, so she came rushing over, but Lloyd is shocked beyond belief because he was certain that he would never see her again. Tau turns her attention to Lloyd, and she can tell that he is using Chi breathing to sense his surroundings, but since she doesn't know he's the same person as Robert, she has no idea where he could have learned it from. But now that she thinks about it, Lloyd looks a lot like Robert too. However, while she was examining his face, she sensed a kobold trying to sneak up behind her. Before she knew it, Silpha had already stepped in to kill the kobold, and she is not happy about this unknown girl getting so close to her future husband. Tau tells her that she could have handled that kobold on her own, and the two obviously aren't going to get along, but to prevent any conflict, Albert acts as a mediator and invites Tau to join them as they head to the lake. Later, as everyone is setting up camp for the night, Albert thanks Tau for her assistance with the kobold attack and introduces himself as the second prince of Salum. Tau hadn't realized he was royalty, so she apologizes for her rude behavior earlier, but more importantly, she thinks Robert is hot. However, despite him being hot, he's not the same guy as Robert, even though he looks similar to him as well. Albert asks if he looks like the person she is looking for, but if anything, she would say Lloyd looks more like Robert in general. With that said, Lloyd is currently avoiding Tau, so she doesn't figure out he is Robert. Using the spatial detection Chi technique ended up almost blowing his cover, but now that Tau knows Lloyd can use it, it would be strange if he suddenly stopped using it altogether. To avoid getting his little dungeon expedition secret revealed, Lloyd decides that he will just hide out in his tent for a while. But as he enters, he is immediately assaulted with a face full of melons. Lloyd isn't flustered by this since he has seen her like this hundreds of times at this point, but he asks what she thinks she is doing right now. Silpha apologizes and says that she just wanted to change her clothes since she got some blood stains on them, but that still doesn't explain why she is doing that here though. She thinks it's only natural to change clothes in Lloyd's tent because she's going to be sleeping here with him, but Lloyd doesn't like the sound of that. Silpha tries to justify it by saying the other guards are all posted around Albert's tent to keep him safe, so she needs to protect Lloyd as well, but Lloyd still maintains that he's going to be fine on his own. Silpha still refuses to take no for an answer and grabs hold of Lloyd with her legs, and she refuses to let him go because Tao is around and Silpha will not risk having Lloyd stolen away from her by the caked-up martial arts girl. Speaking of which, Tao walks into the tent because she could have sworn she sensed Robert using chi, but she sees Silpha suffocating Lloyd. Silpha gets angry that Tao interrupted her time with Lloyd, but Tao calls her a pervert. The two are about to begin fighting with all the knights placing bets on who will win. And in all the chaos, Lloyd walks away with his innocence having been shattered. He walks over at Albert, who compliments him on having girls fight over him already, but Lloyd doesn't see the humor in all this. Albert is serious when he says that Silpha has changed a lot since she started looking after him, but Albert has some words of warning and tells him to be careful about the minds of relationships he has with women like her. Meanwhile, Tao and Silpha have just realized that all the knights are eagerly spectating their fight, as well as Silpha's exposed thighs, so they put their differences aside and go out of their way to beat all of them up. Silpha finally puts on some clothes, and Tao explains that she was tasked with fixing up an old shrine at the top of the hill, which is why she's in the area. But if that's the case, then Silpha tells her to hurry up and get her job done so she can leave Lloyd alone. Tao doesn't appreciate being told how to do her job, but Albert interjects and says it would be dangerous to head all the way up to the mountain right now, and her chi spatial sense is really useful for detecting threats, so he would like her to stay with the group until morning. However, as Tao senses an imminent threat, she doesn't think they'll need a scout anymore because they found the monster they were looking for. The beer wolf charges at the group, so the knights get into formation to defend against it, while Lloyd just gets behind Silpha since he doesn't want to finish the fight too quickly. The bear wolf seems to be awfully fast considering its size, but while Lloyd finds it pretty interesting, Grim is more intrigued by the old shrine up on the mountain. As the fight with the wolf progresses, Tao saves one of the knights with a chi blast, but it seems like it will take more than that to take down the wolf, so Albert steps up to the plate. He pulls out the enchanted sword Lloyd had made, and with it, he casts a fire spell that obliterates the wolf in one hit. All the knights praise their prince for being so powerful, but that spell normally wouldn't be as powerful as it was just now. It was boosted by the enchantments Lloyd had applied to the spellbound sword, so Albert thanked him for making it easy to defeat the wolf. Lloyd is glad that his enchantments are well appreciated, but Grim gets his attention to let him know that they have more pressing matters at hand. That shrine up on the hill that Tao is meant to fix has a demon sealed within it, and the seal seems to be worn down. Suddenly, the bear wolf that Albert had just defeated stands up once more with a dark aura surrounding it, and many more monsters appear around it as well. From the wolf, a voice talks down to the humans, cursing them for daring to harm his minion. He is the demon Pazuzu, and even though he's crazy ugly, he swears to take the lives of each and every one of them for what they have done. He orders all of his minions to attack, so the group steps back in order to defend. Albert slashes at one of the wolves, but in the next moment it was able to regenerate from the wound and nearly bite into Albert. Luckily, Tao steps in to save him at the last moment, but the situation isn't looking good since the wolves are all able to regenerate from any damage they take, no matter how severe. Everyone is fighting for their lives while Silpha just stands and watches because she doesn't care what happens as long as Lloyd remains safe. Lloyd hides behind a barrel to ask Grim if he knows Pazuzu, since they both happen to be demons, but Grim has never met him before. But despite that, he is able to tell that Pazuzu is controlling the monsters by transmuting his magic. It's kind of like making magic puppet strings that allow you to control someone else, and on top of that, he is able to supply mana through the strings to regenerate any damage the wolves take in an instant. Unless Pazuzu himself is taken down, then this fight is never going to end. However, Lloyd stopped listening after he found out that there's something called mana transmutation, so he wants Grim to teach him how to do it. Grim doesn't think now is such a good time for that since the others are fighting for their lives out there, but Lloyd cares way more about learning than if his friends and family die, so he insists on Grim teaching him immediately. Meanwhile, Pazuzu is laughing his butt off since he is having such an easy time attacking these humans. But once Pazuzu insults Lloyd because he thinks he is a coward, all gloves are off with Silpha. She tells Lloyd that she's going to have to leave him alone for a little bit, and Lloyd is so engrossed in his transmutation lesson that he doesn't care what she does. Silpha steps up to Pazuzu and proceeds to call him an assault on all her senses with his ugly face and stanky breath. And since Lloyd is nearby, she can't allow him to pollute the environment any longer with his presence, so she'll kill him now. Pazuzu finds her threats funny because he sees no way she can win with just a sword. The wolves are under his control and will heal indefinitely as long as he supplies them with mana, and demons almost never run out of mana, so he can do this all day. However, Silpha's only response to that is that he should please stop talking because his breath is doing more damage to her nose than any attack ever could. Pazuzu stops wasting time and immediately attacks Silpha, but by the time he realizes what's happened, Silpha has already cut off all his Beowulf's feet. Pazuzu refuses to lose to her, so he begins regenerating his wolf's feet, but as he does this, the others realize that the rest of the wolves seem to have slowed down considerably. They'd figure out that this is because Pazuzu is currently focusing his mana on regenerating his own wolf, so Robert asks Silpha to keep damaging it like she just did so they can finish off the rest of the wolves, and she is happy to comply with his order. But while all this is going on, Lloyd is having a blast learning about the intricacies of mana transmutation. Grim explains to him that it is no easy feat to pull this off, and Pazuzu is insanely talented to be able to control so many monsters all at once. Back to the carnage happening meters away, Silpha has just wounded Pazuzu once more, and as she lands next to one of the knights, she asks him to let her borrow his sword. She is entranced by the sword, and more importantly, by the fact that it was enchanted by Lloyd. But since he sees her attachment to Lloyd, Pazuzu starts talking about how he plans to dissect Lloyd and study his organs to find out what she thinks is so special about him. This makes Silpha unbelievably mad, and Pazuzu takes the opportunity to pounce from behind and eat her whole. However, that does not mean he defeated her, as from inside the mouth, she uses her swords to carve the wolf up with her dual blade technique. She then slashes its head off as it returns to the ground. However, she wasn't satisfied with just that, so she uses another dual blade technique to rip him out of the body of the wolf and carve him up on the ground for maximum suffering. Everyone is amazed after witnessing what Silpha can do when she gets serious, but Lloyd already knew she was strong, so it doesn't surprise him. Pazuzu dared to threaten Lloyd in her presence, which is an unforgivable sin in her eyes, so she draws her sword to his neck and prepares to finish him off once and for all. However, Pazuzu still had one trick up his sleeve and unleashes his foul breath upon the land. On the other side of the battlefield, Tao and Albert have just finished off the last of the monsters that were attacking them, but Albert says they can't celebrate yet because the monsters will simply regenerate eventually unless they defeat Pazuzu, so they need to go and assist Silpha in finishing him off. But just then, Pazuzu's vile breath reaches them, and everyone except Tao is instantly brought to their knees. Even Silpha succumbs to nostril violation as she falls to the floor, so Pazuzu takes the opportunity to regenerate his body and complains that he spent a lot of time making all his puppets, but they were all slashed up in an instant, so he's going to make sure to get his revenge for that and swats Silpha across the lake. Albert wants to go help her, but he can't muster any strength in his body at all. And Pazuzu explains that the weakness they are all experiencing right now is due to the effects of his miasma of domination. However, as Pazuzu attempts to finish Silpha off, his attack gets parried by Tao, who is ready to defend Silpha despite not liking her. She asks Silpha if she is able to stand, and Silpha doesn't want to look like she's weak, so she's perfectly fine, but she doesn't look fine at all. With the last of her strength, Silpha tells Tao to run to Lloyd and protect him, but then she loses consciousness shortly after. Pazuzu praises Silpha for being able to hold out for so long even after being exposed to the largest amount of his miasma. Even the monsters only lasted about 30 seconds before they were completely under his control, but with that being said, he dashes behind Tao and says he wonders why she isn't under his control yet. Tao reacts and tries to kick him, but Pazuzu dodges and grabs her leg before knocking the wind out of her with a punch to the back. He has figured out that she must be using a special breathing technique that is allowing her to withstand the effects of the miasma, but after that punch, her breathing has been disrupted, so she'll succumb to the miasma soon at this rate. Pazuzu mockingly tells her that she could have escaped by herself since she was still able to move, but she chose to stay behind, so that must mean one thing. She wants to become his special minion. That creepy tongue movement he was doing weirded Tao out so much that she found the strength to punch him straight in the mouth and break free. She then puts everything she has into one final attack and blasts Pazuzu into the water. But as she lands on the ground, she realizes she acted too rashly as she shouldn't have used such a big move so recklessly. She tries to steady her breathing in case Pazuzu counterattacks, but she is suddenly attacked from behind by one of the wolves. The monsters that have been slain have had enough time to regenerate themselves, so she is drastically outnumbered now. Tao is pinned between the jaws of one of the wolves, and Pazuzu is taking some time to try to convince Tao to become his minion because everyone else is already knocked out, but he's still standing. So it is obvious that he's the hottest person by default. Immediately after saying this, he hits Tao with the full power blast of his mind-controlled breath, so you believe she should no longer have the presence of mind to deny his advances. However, through all that stink, All she came to realize is that she wasn't wrong after all when she sensed Robert's energy, because she is feeling it again, and she is sure he will kill Pazuzu, so she would rather die than become his minion. Pazuzu gives up on trying to convert her and just has the wolf eat the body so he can forget about Tao, because now he's moving on to Silpha, who he still has a grudge against for slashing up his minions earlier. He thinks it would be best to turn her into one of his minions, although it would probably take a long time due to her high mental fortitude. And while all the others have been decimated and possibly killed, Lloyd has just been splashing away in the river without a care in the world. Pazuzu goes on to gloat about how he will soak Silpha in his domination miasma until he replaced the person most precious to her in all her memories, and that way he'll have control over her for the rest of her life. Lloyd chimes in and asks if that's how he took control of the wolves, and Pazuzu, entranced by his own ego, gloats some more about how he killed the cubs' parents and then used his miasma to make them think that he was their parent all along, making them obedient to only him. Then after the brain lag finally wears off, Pazuzu realizes that there's still a human left standing, which shouldn't be possible, but Lloyd doesn't seem to be affected by it in the slightest. Pazuzu asks what kind of trick Lloyd must be using to survive in the miasma, but in all honesty, Lloyd has no idea how he's managing to do it either. Pazuzu feels insulted that Lloyd would just waltz in and ignore the effects of the miasma, but then he notices Grim, and he has a field day, calling him out as a failure of a demon for serving a human. Not to mention that chibi form, which is a disgrace to everything demons stand for. Grim was initially going to give Pazuzu some advice and tell him to back off because he can't defeat Lloyd, but now that he has shattered Grim's pride, Grim just wants to see him get wrecked. Pazuzu doesn't know what Grim is talking about, so he just sends a bunch of his minions out to kill him and Lloyd. However, Lloyd just smiles because he believes this is a perfect opportunity to test out the mana transmutation he had learned. Grim warns him that there are a lot of monsters here, so if he wants to get them all, he's going to have to use a decent chunk of mana, but Lloyd tells him he doesn't have to worry because he'll be careful not to go overboard. He has always had trouble adjusting the output of his mana to not instantly kill the target, but he manages to find the right balance and creates a flower field that reminds the wolves of their parents. In doing so, he also takes away Pazuzu's control over them, so they all obey Lloyd now. He takes a moment to look for the wolf that ate Tao, and once he finds it, he orders it to vomit her up right now, which it does, and she's still in one piece, but she's unconscious, slimy, and disrobed. Pazuzu realized that Lloyd must be some amazing sorcerer to have been able to convert that much of his mana into a flower field in an instant and take control of his minions, but he still thinks he can win control back, so he spits his breath at them and orders for them to return. And they are definitely returning, but I don't think it's in the way Pazuzu was hoping for. The monsters now remember the horrible treatment Pazuzu has subjected them to, as well as the fact that he killed their parents, so they all attack in unison. Lloyd is impressed with the teamwork the wolves are displaying, but Pazuzu is simply too strong for them, so he ends up beating up the dogs for betraying him. After he has taken care of the wolves, Pazuzu tells Lloyd that while he may have lost his minions, now that he doesn't have to supply them with mana, he is at full power, and even if he is a really good sorcerer, magic spells are ineffective against demons. Lloyd asks Grim whether what Pazuzu says is true about demons being immune to magic, but Grim can't exactly confirm it since all he knows is that no demon has ever been killed by magic before. Hearing this, Lloyd's curiosity is piqued since he now wants to find out if demons are truly invincible in the face of magic or if they are just really difficult to kill. And if it is the latter, then he wants to figure out what exactly it would take to kill Pazuzu. Lloyd unleashes the full extent of his mana, and in an instant, Pazuzu realizes he is a dead meat. Lloyd's mana is so dense that it might as well be unlimited void, and you wouldn't want to be anywhere near him when he gets like this. Lloyd says he is glad because he finally has a chance to test out a new spell, and since Pazuzu is a demon, then Lloyd doesn't need to worry about killing him because he has no human rights. Lloyd casts a barrier, but Pazuzu dodges it, and he immediately realizes that Lloyd isn't trying to fight him right now. He's trying to use his barriers to trap Pazuzu so he can run his experiments on him, and he isn't going to stick around to find out what kind of experiments those are going to be, so he starts trying to escape. Lloyd keeps chasing after him with barriers, and Grim joins in on the fun so Lloyd can cast even more barriers simultaneously. Pazuzu is scared out of his mind because of how fast Lloyd is casting the barriers, but he is still able to stay a step ahead and dodge them until he ends up getting caught in a mega barrier. It's over for Pazuzu now, but he can't accept that he has been caught like a lab rat, so he calls Lloyd a psychopath for wanting to perform experiments on him. But this confuses Lloyd, since while he may indeed be a psychopath, Pazuzu himself said magic attacks don't work on him, and besides, Lloyd can tell that Pazuzu performed experiments on those wolves he took control of, so it's a bit hypocritical of him to call Lloyd out for wanting to perform experiments of his own. Pazuzu suddenly wants to talking things out with Lloyd, but it's too late for him as Lloyd has already begun chanting the spell that will lead to his demise. He's casting all 4 elements at the highest level in sequence, and repeating it 100 times a second, so when he blasts Pazuzu with it, it looks like a colorful kaleidoscope, so Lloyd wants to keep it going for at least 30 minutes. However, after only 5 minutes in there, Pazuzu is already spent. Lloyd is disappointed because he really thought demons were immune to magic, so he could use Pazuzu as a guinea pig forever, but Grimm explains that it's more like demons are highly resistant to magic. So most powerful magic attacks end up feeling like an unpleasant ray of light or sound. However, when it's coming from someone as powerful as Lloyd, it's like being forced to experience 1,000 paper cuts a second. And all that stress likely fried Pazuzu's brain, so he's left contemplating the life decisions that led him to this fate. Just then, everyone finally starts waking up, so Lloyd panics because he needs to make up an excuse so that no one figures out that he's the one who defeated Pazuzu. He comes up with the idea to tell everyone that Robert came and saved the day, which they all believe without a second thought, and Tao begins frantically searching for him since she is still dead set on getting herself a boyfriend. Since the mission was a success, Albert and Lloyd return to the castle, where the king formally thanks Albert since on paper, he managed to perform his monster extermination duties as well as kill a demon while he was there, but the king still scolds him for taking such a risk and going out there with so few guards. But that aside, the king wants to give his thanks to the adventurers who helped him, so he asks where Tao and Robert are. Albert doesn't know where Robert went since Lloyd said he left before they all regained consciousness, but as for Tao, she was still giddy over the idea that Robert came to save her from getting eaten, but then she realized that the coat she was covered with actually belongs Lloyd. So before she could put the pieces together, Lloyd distracts her by saying he saw Robert in the forest, and without a second thought or any clothes for that matter, she runs into the forest to find her future boyfriend. The king is disappointed since he wanted to meet Robert because he would have to be an incredibly powerful sorcerer for him to defeat a demon so quickly, but this is where Albert chimes in saying Lloyd was a huge contributor to the success of the mission. His enchantments allowed them to make it out of there with minimal casualties, so Albert believes it would be a good idea to add Lloyd to the race to succeed the throne. The king isn't against the idea, but he doesn't understand why Albert would advocate for an additional rival in throne succession. Albert doesn't care if he ends up becoming king or not. What he wants is for the most capable person to have the throne, so he believes Lloyd should get his chance as well. However, when the king asks Lloyd if he wants to be added to the list of throne successors, the only thing Lloyd has to say is, "Nah, I'm good." Later, Lloyd is out playing in the courtyard with his new pet, one of the bear wolves. It followed him home, but Grimm gets jealous of all the attention the wolf is getting, so he makes himself fluffy as well to get some attention from Lloyd. It indeed gets Lloyd to start playing with him, but then Silpha shows up, so he has to hide Grimm and shoves him inside the bear wolf's fur. Silpha asks if Lloyd has come up with a name for the wolf yet, and he has decided to call it Shiro. He's also planning on teaching it some commands, so Silpha suggests he might be able to use his mana to make Shiro obey him, and Lloyd likes the idea, so he immediately starts brainstorming ways to make it happen. Meanwhile, from a terrace of the castle, the king and Albert are having a chat about Lloyd, and the king thinks he is really modest for not wanting to get involved with the throne. But Albert believes Lloyd is just far too gifted to be limited by the responsibilities of ruling a country. But with that said, they can't wait to see what Lloyd does with his future, because it is sure to be something great. After a bit of practice, Lloyd has taught Shiro how to do a bunch of basic commands. However, he runs into issues when it comes to more complex commands like spin around 3 times. He has tried writing a command spell and sending it to Shiro, but it's not that Shiro doesn't want to do it, but rather, he doesn't understand what the command means, so he ends up just getting confused by it. The only way to get Shiro to understand the complex commands would be to consult someone who is extremely knowledgeable about monsters, so both Lloyd and Silpha start thinking about it, and they soon remember that they know someone who's really knowledgeable about monsters. Lloyd's sister, Elise, but she's a little weird, so they are both reluctant to meet with her. They head over to Elise's tower, and it's just as weird as they remember it being, so Grimm asks who Elise is meant to be. Lloyd provides a detailed explanation and tells Grimm that Elise is the 6th princess of the kingdom and 3 years older than him. In addition, as you could probably guess from her garden, she is an animal lover through and through. And not just of usual kinds either, as she'll keep anything that has a pulse and isn't human. Just then, Elise spots Lloyd, so she comes running down the stairs and jumps on top of him since she is so happy to see him. Lloyd says he's happy to see her as well, but then she kisses him out of nowhere, to the horror of both Silpha and Lloyd. Elise's personal maid, Eris, comes running down the stairs after her and scolds her for always kissing her brother every time he visits her, but she says she can't stop herself because she thinks Lloyd is so cute. After the shock wears off, they both sit down for some tea, and Elise asks what brings Lloyd here since he doesn't visit often. She thinks it has something to do with the cute bear wolf he brought with him, and she is right. Lloyd explains that the bear wolf's name is Shiro, and he is impressed that Elise could tell that Shiro was a bear wolf after seeing him for the first time. She can't really explain how she can tell these things, but all she knows is that she loves animals, and it probably has something to do with that mana thing everyone talks about. While Elise is fondling Shiro, Silpha goes up to Lloyd and suggests that they should leave since Elise isn't even familiar with the concept of mana, so there's no way she'll be able to teach him how to communicate with monsters using mana. Lloyd still thinks it's worth waiting a bit longer since she could still be helpful, so he asks Elise if she can show him one of her monsters. Elise smiles at him and says she already called one, which is when Lloyd and Silpha realize that there's a monster standing right behind them. Elise introduces it as Liru, who is a lesser Fenrir, which is Lloyd's interest peaked because not only was Liru able to sneak up behind him and Silpha without either of them noticing, but it also stole Silpha's bonnet. He wonders when Elise could have possibly given that command since Liru knew how to approach them from behind and snatch Silpha's bonnet. That's a pretty complex command, and she did all that without any indication of it, so Lloyd is wondering how she managed to do it. He enthusiastically asks her to teach him how to communicate with Shiro the way she just did with Liru, and she says she'll be happy to teach him. But the first lesson on the matter is a bit confusing because she says it's all about love. According to Elise, as long as you have love, you can grow to understand any monster, and once you do that, you can talk to them without needing words, which she demonstrates by calling all the animals around to her side. Just then, Lloyd realizes something, and a moment later, a bunch of animals come running towards him and the maids. A couple of them try to steal Eris and Silpha's clothes, but the ones that went to Lloyd are peacefully chilling on his head. He has just realized what he was doing wrong when he was trying to command Shiro. When Elise controls her pets, she isn't issuing commands to them in the first place. Instead, she just shares her will with the animals. So to replicate what she does, instead of ordering the animals around, Lloyd needs to share a mental image of what he wants, and then he sends that image over to Shiro. As soon as Shiro receives it, he understands what the assignment is, so he immediately starts running around Lloyd 3 times and leaps into the air with a bark. Lloyd is really happy since Shiro did exactly what he wanted, perfect down to the sound bark. Eris is amazed that Lloyd could actually learn something from Elise's love talk. Elise is so glad that someone finally understands her that she runs to hug Lloyd again, but she was still sharing her mental image with the pets, so all of them also hug Lloyd along with Silpha and Eris as well. So by the time Lloyd manages to get himself free, he is slightly traumatized and would rather not talk about it. On the bright side, he did manage to figure out how to connect with monsters through his meeting with Elise, and Silpha is glad he's happy. But she wants to spend time with Lloyd as well, so she suggests that they start sword practice immediately. However, before Lloyd can be dragged off and forced to practice for hours, Albert steps in and says he needs to talk to Lloyd about something, so they'll have to reschedule his sword practice for another day. Silpha tries to argue with Albert about Lloyd's sword training being extremely important, but Lloyd doesn't want to do it, so he decides to go with whatever Albert needs him for. Albert says that there's someone he wants Lloyd to meet, although he probably already knows him. It's Lloyd's brother, 4th Prince Dian. They head over to Dian's section of the castle where he talks about how he heard that Lloyd enchanted Albert's sword. Lloyd confirms it, but Dian is still skeptical that he could actually pull that off. He isn't going to say it's impossible that Lloyd did it, but it's hard for him to believe, so he wants Lloyd to prove his skill by enchanting a sword right in front of him. Albert explains that Dian is being so strict about this because he is a blacksmith and he takes his craft very seriously. He has prepared everything that Lloyd would need to enchant this sword, so Lloyd begins his enchanting process. However, Dian is made to eat his own words when Lloyd successfully enchants the sword right before his eyes. He can barely believe what he is holding in his hand because Lloyd somehow managed to cram 4 different enchantments on it, but he eventually just accepts that Lloyd must be a different breed of genius. He has moved on from his doubt and now excitedly asks Lloyd to help him fulfill his dream of creating the ultimate spellbound sword. He's referring to a sword that is forged with a spell engraved onto the steel, a super weapon that can only be created when a blacksmith and an enchanter work in unison. Dian tells Lloyd that he used to love sorcery when he was younger, but it didn't work out for him since he doesn't have a talent for it, which is why he developed an interest in spellbound swords, since with those, anyone can use magic regardless of talent. His dream is to one day make it so that everyone in the kingdom of Salim can use magic through the use of spellbound swords, whether they have talent or not. And Lloyd, listening to this whole thinking about how he doesn't give a fuck about Dian's dream, but learning how to make swords could be cool, so he decides to go along with it. After changing into a new outfit, Lloyd asks Diane what spell he wants to engrave onto the steel, and Diane doesn't have anything particular in mind, but he just wants it to be a fire spell. In that case, Lloyd suggests the Pyrolence spell since it's a good and powerful fire spell, but Diane doesn't think it will be possible to get it to work with a sword since the spell has 14 parts to it, but a spellbound sword is only able to hold 5 parts at most. But if that's the issue, then Lloyd says he'll just compress the spell into 2 parts. Diane can't believe Lloyd can do that, but he does it, and the pair move on to the next step of the production process, applying it to the metal. However, as Lloyd places the enchantment on the metal, the bar crumbles to pieces in an instant. Lloyd doesn't know what could have gone wrong, but he assumes that the spell may just have been too heavy for the steel to contain, so he asks Diane to try again with him. While Lloyd is drawing up some more enchantments, Diane notices Silpha staring at him from outside, and it's clear she wants to be included in Lloyd's project as well. So Diane invites her to join, but as they go for many more attempts, every single time they try to apply the enchantment, it shatters instantly. Lloyd apologizes for not being able to get it right and wasting so much of Diane's mana essence, but he really can't figure out what he is doing wrong here since he toned down the spell's strength to the point that it's just a basic fireball. Grim is surprised to see Lloyd having so much trouble with something since he always seems to learn things so quickly, but then he notices something off about the mana essence that Diane has. Meanwhile, Diane is being very supportive of Lloyd and doesn't blame him for not getting it right away, so he tells him that he doesn't have to worry since they can try as many times as needed, especially since he managed to get a ton of mana essence on sale at the dollar store. Hearing that, Lloyd realizes what's going on here, so he takes 1 glass of the mana essence and casts Purify on it, revealing that there's barely any hematite in there. The stuff Diane bought seems to be sufficient for things like regular enchantments, but something like a spellbound sword would probably require a higher concentration of hematite to pull off. Unfortunately, hematite is made of monster cores, and Diane doesn't have any just laying around, so Lloyd thinks he may have to sneak out of the castle again to go dungeon exploring, but then Silpha suggests the exact same thing. Lloyd is shocked since he knows there is a general belief that a young prince shouldn't head into a dungeon for no reason, but after the previous encounter with Pazuzu, Albert talked with the king about letting Lloyd try more new things in order to expand his horizons a bit, so since they have permission, she suggests they head to the guild to get things started. Lloyd and Silpha arrive at the guild a while later, and they are welcomed by the receptionist, Katarina, who gives them the required registration forms, and Lloyd is a little hesitant to fill it out since he is so young, but Silpha tells him it is alright to put the truth down. After he's done filling out the form, he's meant to touch the mana measuring orb, but Lloyd knows how these things work, and with his current mana, he is sure it would probably explode if he touched it, and that would draw too much attention. So he puts a lot of extra effort into suppressing his mana until it's down to almost nothing. Once he is done, he touches the orb, and although it doesn't explode, it still gives him a magic rating of A, which he finds weird since his mana should be at 1% of what it usually is. Even if the measurements say his magic is A since he has a 0 in all other stats, his overall rating is E, so a couple of nosy adventurers behind him start making fun of him. The receptionist is able to recognize talent though, so she compares Lloyd's potential to that of the legendary Silverblade adventurer. The guys in the back are offended that someone would compare Lloyd to the Silver Blade because she was a phenomenon that tore through countless dungeons until she just disappeared one day. Meanwhile, the Silver Blade that is standing right in front of them asks to take on a dungeon quest with Lloyd. Unfortunately, Katarina tells her that an adventurer of at least B rank needs to be present for the quest to be approved, so Silpha says she'll just re-register with the guild since she was A rank back in the day. However, that won't work either since re-registering comes with a 2 rank demotion, so she still doesn't meet the requirements for the quest. Fortunately, there's someone here who can help them out, and it's Tao. Silpha asks why Tao is here since she was supposed to be looking for Robert, but she can't find him at all. And she searched through so many dungeons that she ended up becoming A rank, so she has accepted that she'll never see Robert again, which is why she wants Lloyd to introduce her to Albert instead and maybe set up a tea date. Since they now meet the requirements for the quest, they all head to a random dungeon where they'd breeze through and find the core in no time. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Albert goes to check in with Diane to see how the spellbound swords are coming along, and he's really optimistic about it, but they'll need to wait until Lloyd gets back with a core for the hematite. Unfortunately, Albert doesn't have a few days to wait since it looks like a war could be looming, and those swords would have been really useful. But he tells Diane that he doesn't need to worry about it since it's not his job to fight, but Diane still wants to be able to help, and it looks like he's going to get his chance since Lloyd has returned with the dungeon core, and they are able to use it to make the enchanted steel. And eventually, the spellbound sword has been created, but it's a little more powerful than Lloyd intended, so he plans to tone it down in the next models. After a long day's work, Lloyd settles down for the night, but before he can get any sleep, he notices that there's something in the garden, or rather someone. Now that he has noticed the person, Lloyd flies down to the courtyard to greet the stealthy intruder, and upon realizing that they have been discovered, the intruder immediately tries to escape. However, Lloyd had already put up a barrier around them, so there was no way they were getting away from him now. He wants to have a little chat with the intruder, since they are technically trespassing, but the assassin then takes off her cover, revealing that she is a girl with very questionable fashion choices, and she apologizes ahead of time because she didn't want to have to use her special move on a child, but she has no choice given the situation. Lloyd's head begins to feel fuzzy, and he smells flowers for some reason, so he realizes that he must have been poisoned. He immediately tries using a purification spell, but the girl tells him it's no use since nothing can purify her poison, and Lloyd soon falls to his knees due to the poison's effects. Despite being poisoned and on the verge of death, Lloyd is still calmly thinking about how Purify is able to neutralize all known poison. So if it isn't working right now, then this must be an unknown toxin, which also means the girl is transmuting the nature of her poison with her mana. There are certain people who are born with types of mana, and those with particularly threatening attributes are typically known as the Blighted. The girl confirms Lloyd's suspicion that she is poison blighted, and from birth, she has been spreading poison all around her, which is why people call her Ren, the Poison Moth. Ren then walks over to the barrier and uses her poison to weaken it before kicking her way through, and Lloyd is impressed that she managed to get through a barrier he created. Before she leaves, Ren tells Lloyd that she only donated him with a little bit of her poison, so he probably won't die, but he's going to be in terrible pain for about 3 days, but that's not her problem, so she leaves. After she's gone, Lloyd talks about how impressive she was with her concealment technique, but Grimm doesn't think this is a good time to be impressed considering he is still poisoned. However, Lloyd says there's no need to worry since he is actively using the Healing Breath spell to recover, and while it may not be strong enough to purify the poison entirely, it is still slowly getting rid of it, so there are no real effects on his body anymore. If that's the case and he was able to move all along, then Grimm asks why he chose not to go after Ren when she was running away, but Lloyd thought it would be better to let her go and eventually lead him to her hideout. Lloyd had heard something about the Assassin's Guild from Silpha, and she mentioned how there are 6 members who all have high bounties on their heads, and what's most important to Lloyd is the fact that they all have innate special abilities, and he can't wait to learn about them. He uses his mana to track Ren down and sees that she is currently running through the city, but Grimm wonders how Lloyd is able to find her at all when she is basically undetectable. Lloyd explains that Ren probably hides herself by ripping a hole in space to cancel out all graces of her presence, but once you realize that, you just have to look for the spots where you can't sense anything. Lloyd takes Grimm to go after Ren. Meanwhile, in the Assassin's Guild, Ren is informing the other members of what happened in the castle, but one guy can't understand why she didn't try to kill him after he discovered her. Ren didn't want to kill a kid for no reason, and besides, she managed to get all the information she needed about the castle mass-producing spellbound swords, so they know there may be signs of war approaching. The guy cuts Ren off and tells her that she needs to stop trying to act like their leader, Jade, because she's long gone now. Ren refuses to accept it because she still believes Jade will return one day, but their argument gets interrupted by another member who tells them to knock it off because they have bigger issues to deal with as they are currently being watched. Lloyd realizes that he has been found out, so he undoes his concealment spell and slowly floats to the ground. The assassins are surprised to see that the 7th prince is the one who is spying on them. There are rumors saying he tries to act unimpressive, but he is actually really powerful and ambitious. But whatever the case may be, now that he has seen the Assassin's Guild hideout, they can't just let him leave. Hearing that they plan to attack him, Lloyd drops his barrier, but that seems like the worst thing he could possibly do in this situation, but Lloyd has a very good reason for doing so. He wants them to hit him with everything they've got, and he's going to take it head-on so that he can experience all their unique mana traits. He traces Teo's fighting style so that he has a way to defend himself and tells them all to come at him. The first-time attack is the green-haired guy who dashes in front of Lloyd and attempts to kick him, but gets blocked. He then dashes away again and this time tries several handstand kicks, but Lloyd is able to block it again thanks to Teo's ironclad defensive technique. By now, Lloyd has noticed that the guy seems to be incredibly flexible, so the guy introduces himself as Babylon the Warp Blighted. He is way more flexible than anything a person could manage even if they use sorcery, so Lloyd is intrigued, but he lets his guard down for too long and gets snuck up on by Crow, the Cursed Blighted, and after he tells Lloyd to sink, he feels a heavy force pushing him to the ground. Meanwhile, the big guy named Galilei tries to attack him, so Lloyd uses a physical enhancement spell in order to overcome the pressure holding him to the ground, and in doing so, he also avoids getting hit by Galilei. But as he lands on his shoulders, he finds that he is completely stuck because Galilei's special ability is to create sticky stuff all over his body. Lloyd is struggling to escape the webbing, so he decides to just ditch his clothes to get free, and it works, although he now has no pants on. While he's still in the air, he is thinking about everything he has learned, from Crow's cursed speech to Galilee's webs, but there's still one more person he hasn't seen yet, and she's finally stepping in as she strikes Lloyd with a strengthened cloth. She finds Lloyd cute, especially with how he's just running around with half his clothes missing. So she wants to teach him a little about fear and shame. Emphasis on the fear part because she stabs herself in the leg and Lloyd's leg receives the exact same wound. Her name is Talia, and she's the pain-blighted, meaning all injuries that are inflicted upon her are shared with her target. Despite having his leg impaled, Lloyd couldn't be happier with all the new stuff he is learning. Talia tries to slash him again, but Lloyd jumps back and gets away, so she regroups with the rest of the team, and they all prepare to attack him again. Talia looks to Lloyd and asks him if he has learnt a little bit about fear yet, but right now fear is the last thing that would go through Lloyd's mind, as he is simply ecstatic. He heals the stab wound in his leg, and Talia is surprised that he could cast a healing spell that works so fast. Lloyd then gets up and begins boosting the strength of the cloth in his hands until they form two swords, and with weapons in hand, he traces Silpha's fighting style. Galilee is starting to panic a little since the fighting stance Lloyd is using looks a lot like the adventurer who traumatized him years ago, and as Lloyd charges forward, they all experience terror like never before, so they immediately try to flee. As Babylon is trying to escape while wondering how Lloyd could have learned both martial arts and sword skills, Lloyd appears behind him and knocks him back down. He wants to see how Babylon handles taking damage, so leaps off the roof to slam him to the ground, and it looks like Babylon just relaxes his body at the moment of impact, make himself more rubbery. Crow and Galilee both try to sneak attack Lloyd at once, but as Crow tells him to get blown away, Lloyd gets out of the way, so the words end up hitting Galilee and making him fly backwards into Talia. With the other two currently unable to fight, Lloyd now wants to see how Crow handles getting attacked, so he turns to strike him and Crow attempts to say stop, but he gets cut off at the last second. Even though Crow didn't finish the word, it still did manage to slow Lloyd down, so Lloyd is interested to find out what the requirements are for the activation of his cursed speech. After seeing his friend get bodied so badly, Galilee gets angry and tries to go after Lloyd himself. But his webs are currently stuck to Talia's clothes, so there's an unfortunate wardrobe malfunction and Talia is left standing there with no clothes on. Lloyd doesn't care though and immediately attacks her, so Talia is forced to pull out her sword to block. She warns Lloyd that any damage he deals to her will also be applied to himself, so she thinks it's a bad idea for him to attack her now, and she's hoping for a break so she can get dressed. However, her warning just makes Lloyd want to hit her even more, and as he shoots her into a wall where her back arcs so bad that her spine is definitely broken. The same thing happens to Lloyd as well, but he is still having fun despite the severe internal organ damage. While his guard was down, Galilee grabbed his arms, and with his sticky webs, there's nothing Lloyd can do to escape. Unfortunately, Galilee forgot to account for the fact that Lloyd can just slip out of his armed guards. Once free, Lloyd uses one of Teo's moves to blast Galilee away. Ren is now truly terrified of Lloyd, but she's the only one that Lloyd hasn't fought with yet, so Lloyd says he's coming for her next. But before he can attack, Galilee steps in to protect her and says Ren doesn't have control over her poison, so she won't be fighting. Now that Lloyd thinks about it, none of them really have good control over their abilities, and that's the reason why it's called a blight in the first place, and why they were forced to live a life of crime. So since control is what they lack, Lloyd comes up with a solution and dodges Galilee's attack before zapping him in the back with something. Ren tries to go save him, but Galilee stops her and says he is actually fine. And not just that either, he's better than he has ever been because he can control his mana now. Lloyd engraved a spell on his back to help circulate the out-of-control mana, so he should be able to manage his powers better, and Lloyd even offers to do the same for everyone else as well. Their hostility towards Lloyd is completely gone now that they have had their blight cured, and since Lloyd has given them the chance to live a normal life, Galilee thinks it is important to tell Lloyd their backstory. Lloyd really doesn't care to listen to any long-winded stories, so he politely declines, but Galilee starts talking anyway. Lloyd is being bored out of his mind as Galilee talks until he mentions the Assassin's Guild leader, Jade, who has the ability to teleport. Jade had gathered all of them to form the Assassin's Guild so that they could make a name for themselves and one day become accepted within society. But then Jade accidentally teleported himself somewhere else and they haven't seen him since. Just then, a teleportation ring similar to Jade's appears in the room, and a black envelope is teleported in. A while later, Slifa has finally tracked down Lloyd's scent and bursts into the hideout looking for him, but even though she is sure he was here because of his smell, all she manages to find is a letter stuck to the wall. She takes it back to Albert, who's about to lose his shit because the letter says Lloyd is going on a trip with the Assassin's Guild to visit Lodos, which happens to be the place that is threatening war with Saloum. Albert thinks Lloyd may have been kidnapped, so he'll be forced to go to war with Lodos immediately. But then again, it's hard to believe that anyone could take Lloyd against his will, so he decides to look for a peaceful resolution. However, Silpha then shows him what she found in the hideout, and it's all of Lloyd's clothes, and it seems to be covered in white goo. So peace gets thrown out the window because Albert and Silpha are ready for war. Meanwhile, Lloyd and the others in the Assassin's Guild are currently being teleported to the Lodos Kingdom and are crossing the country at crazy speeds. After the letter appeared, Galilei immediately recognized the symbol on it to be the one Jade made for them, so Galilei anxiously opens the letter, and sure enough, it is indeed from Jade. In the letter, Jade apologizes for taking so long to contact them, but he had been a little busy. He says he has successfully overthrown the Lord of Lodos, who was planning a war, so he is now the new Lord of the Kingdom and would like to invite them all to join him for a celebration. Everyone is really happy about this new development, but Lloyd takes a look at the letter, and he is happy for different reasons. Galilei approaches him and kneels down to thank Lloyd again for helping them control their curses, but they need to head to Lodos now, so he promises they'll repay him for his kindness someday. However, Ren has something else in mind, as she would like Lloyd to join them in heading to the Lodos Kingdom, so he can engrave a spell on Jade as well to keep his blight in check. Lloyd doesn't have a problem with accompanying them, but he asks if Ren knows where this letter came from in the first place. It just appeared out of nowhere, which means it was accurately teleported here from somewhere else. Teleportation magic is still a huge unknown in this world, and it's not the kind of thing that someone could just randomly figure out how to use, so there's only one real explanation. Jade must be able to control his powers after all, but it wouldn't make sense for him to lie about something like that. Still, they can no longer guarantee that what was said in the letter is true, so it could turn out to be a trap if they go to Lodos now. However, Ren still wants to believe that Jade would never betray them, so she naively suggests that maybe he just learned how to control his powers on his own. If that's the case, then Lloyd won't need to join them when they go for the reunion. But he's still going to follow them anyway because his interest in teleportation magic is at an all-time high. Ren wants to trust Jade, but she can't help but worry about what would happen if something really is wrong there. So Lloyd tells her not to think about it so much because if worst comes to worst, he's going to be with them and he can pretty much handle any trouble that arises. Galilei is once again singing the praises of Lloyd for being so kind to them. And after that last statement from him, Ren is officially in love with him. Back to the present, Lloyd has to make a pit stop with his flight spell since none of them could handle the high speeds. He complains about them wasting time here since they were only flying for 10 minutes, but they would all literally die if they had to suffer through another minute of supersonic speed, and Babylon is so bent out of shape over it that he's stuck. Lloyd concedes and says they can just take a break here and walk the rest of the way since they are pretty close already, and since they'll be taking a break, Ren offers to go get something for them to eat. While Lloyd is helping Babylon straighten out his spine, Babylon mentions that Ren is trying to show off to Lloyd since she grew up in the woods. She accidentally killed her parents with her poison when she was younger, so she was left to fend for herself out in the wilderness, and the first person to find her was Jade. He brought her back to the hideout and introduced her to everyone, but they were all a bit scared due to the poison ability she had, so Galilei didn't think it was a good idea to have her around, especially since she kept growling at them like she's got rabies. Regardless, Jade was dead set on keeping Ren and began hugging her, but that made her release a bunch of her poison and he collapses to the ground. Despite the near-death experience, Jade still wanted to have Ren live with them, so he asked for everyone's help with taking care of her. Since he insisted, they all agree to help him and Galilei offers to be her teacher, while Crow and Talia make some new clothes. That was the moment Ren got to experience what it was like to have a family, and eventually Jade came up with a spell inscribed onto her clothes which would neutralize her poison mana, so she would finally be able to live a relatively normal life around others. Jade acted as a big brother to her, and after hearing what Jade did, Lloyd is really interested in meeting him, which says a lot since this is the first time he has shown any interest in a living person. Eventually, Ren gets back from her hunting trip, and she makes whatever this is supposed to be. She gets points for effort, but no one wants to try her disgusting food, so Babylon asks Crow to use his cursed speech to tell the food to become tasty. He was about to do it, but then Ren Poison punches him in the gut because she doesn't want him to change anything about her food. Talia tries to reason with her and reminds her that Lloyd is a prince, so this stuff she made probably isn't something he would want to eat. However, she's dead wrong because Lloyd is scarfing it down without hesitation. It's not the worst thing he has eaten since he was broke in his past life and had to eat stuff that was a lot worse than this. The others gain the courage to try it after seeing Lloyd eat it, and the food may look terrible, but it's actually not that bad once you get used to it. Ren did a pretty good job considering she has never gotten the chance to practice before due to her poison, so everyone ends up enjoying Ren's cooking, and she hopes she can share it with Jade someday. We get another flashback to a time when Jade returned to the team with some really good news. The guild was reconsidering the bounties on their head, so the others start celebrating because they may be able to rejoin society since they are no longer outlaws. Jade tells them not to get their hopes up since the guild is still only considering it, but it's at least a step towards a future where they are accepted for who they are, and that's reason enough to celebrate. Jade was happy to have such good friends, but there's something he feels guilty about, so he gets everyone's attention so he can confess to them. He had said he was just a random person, but in reality, he is the third prince of Lordost. He is a noble, and he admits that he approached them all so he could use them for his own goals. Lordost is ruled by his family, who are all downright evil. They plan for war every day like bloodthirsty animals, so Jade was desperate to find a way to stop them from starting a senseless war, which is why he put this team together. He fully expects them to be mad at him for manipulating them, but they all couldn't care less what his initial motives were. Besides, they all pretty much knew he had to be royalty of some kind with the way he acted. But Ren had no idea, so she was having a meltdown while trying to process it all. While Ren is still lagging, the others tell Jade that they all have their circumstances that brought them here, and they aren't pleasant backstories as they don't usually talk about them. But at the end of the day, regardless of what his motivation may be, he is still family to them, so he could have just kept his mouth shut about it and they wouldn't have questioned him. But now that he has mentioned it, they are all down to help him assassinate the Lordost family if he wants. However, he actually doesn't want that since it would be terrible if the guild were to find out that the Assassins Guild killed people based on a personal grudge. The bounty reconsideration would be called off, and it may even increase if they get involved. So he wishes to handle the Lordost family by himself. He has always thought of the Assassins Guild as his real family, and he would love nothing more than to stay with them forever, but he can't stand by when Lordost is about to start a war. Since he'll be leaving soon, he wants them all to make a promise with him to keep the Assassins Guild going even if he doesn't come back alive from Lordost. And if he doesn't manage to return, then that would mean he had successfully become the new ruler of Lordost, so he swears he'll make the region a place where the Blighted can live freely. After hearing the story, even Grimm is convinced that Jade must be an amazing person, and after they are done with their meal, they continue with the short walk over to Lordost. But Lloyd fell asleep along the way, so Galilei had to carry him. As they continue to walk, Ren gets out in front of the group and expresses her concerns. She doesn't believe Jade would betray them, but it still might be possible that the Lordost family is manipulating him into doing something wrong. So she thinks they should let Lloyd rest here while they all go scope out the area to make sure it's safe. Galilei agrees and pries Lloyd off his face before turning to Grimm to ask him to watch over Lloyd while they are gone, but Grimm doesn't think that's such a good idea since Lloyd is practically invincible even when he is asleep. But if they go into Lordost alone and something actually goes wrong, Lloyd would be mad at him for letting them get into trouble, so he's going to go with them. They arrive at the castle, and there seems to be a party organized, which checks out with what Jade had told them in his letter, and Grimm doesn't sense any aggression coming from the people here, so he thinks it is safe to go get Lloyd and return. Now that Galilei thinks about it, he recalls Jade having an interest in Lloyd for some reason, but before he can elaborate further, they are spotted by a staff member of the castle. The guy recognizes them as the Assassins Guild, but rather than sound an alarm, he brings them down to the banquet and announces that the guests of honor have arrived. It looks like there really was nothing to worry about, so Grimm prepares to fly back to Lloyd so he can bring him here, but Ren is getting a little nervous now that she is so close to meeting Jade again, so she asks Grimm to stay behind with her for a little while longer. A little while later, Jade finally arrives in the banquet hall, and they are all really glad to see him, but the new look is a little jarring for them. Jade decides to change back to his normal clothes since he is among friends, so he snaps his fingers and has them teleported into his body. The others are shocked that he really has learned to control his powers completely, and when they ask how he managed to pull it off, he just says he practiced a lot until he got it. Ren goes up to finally talk to him again, but she's so emotional that she can't find the words to express how she feels. Unfortunately, Jade is tired of acting, so he turns the mood of the room as all the guests turn evil. Jade is somehow able to use cursed speech to pin them all to the ground, and he announces to the crowd that they can have their pick of the blighted people he lured in. He doesn't even care enough to remember any of their names, but before things get any worse, Grimm uses his powers to attack Jade and buy enough time for the others to escape. He seems to know what's going on with Jade, but before he can explain, Jade teleports behind him and kicks Grimm across the map. Grimm ends up crash landing right next to Lloyd by luck, and after he wakes up, he starts explaining that something terrible has happened to the members of the Assassins Guild. Back at the castle, Ren asks Jade what he's doing while still clinging to the hope that there's some good explanation for what's going on. But her hopes are crushed once Jade reveals that everybody here has been possessed by demons he brought from the netherworld, and he himself isn't actually even Jade, but rather he is a demon who took over Jade's body so he could have his teleportation powers. His name is Gazarm, the catastrophe of the netherworld, and he says the real Jade is dead because he has taken over his body. He took great joy in wearing down his mind for months at a time, and through all of it, the only thing that was keeping him going was how much he cared for all his friends. The body of a blighted person is a great host for demons, so he knew Gazarm would go after his friends if he took over his body, so instead of letting that happen, he chose to end his life with his own hands. If he had been successful, then he would have killed both himself and Gazarm. However, Gazarm wouldn't even let the man die in peace, as just when Jade was about to die, he simply healed all the damage instantly. The other demons are growing impatient to take over the body of one of the blighted, so Gazarm grabs Ren and jokingly warns the demons to be careful since this one has poison so strong that she killed her parents at birth. Despite how angry all of them are, they are unable to do anything to stop Gazarm, but as he inspects Ren's body so she can be taken over, he pauses once he spots the spell Lloyd had engraved on her. He is outraged that someone would dare to mark his property, so he uses cursed speech to force Ren to tell him who did this. Through sheer will and her gratitude to Lloyd, she resists the compulsion to sell Lloyd out at first, but Gazarm keeps screaming in her face to tell him who gave her the mark. All of a sudden, barriers are cast around all the Assassin's Guild members, and a massive death laser strikes the ground, vaporizing everything around. The one who cast the laser is Lloyd, and he looks like he's really pissed. The demons are terrified at the sight of the power Lloyd just displayed, but before he deals with them, Lloyd goes down to the Assassin's Guild members to check if they are all alright. He heals Ren's injury and says that Grimm already told him all about what happened, so he wants them to get out of here as soon as possible. They are the targets of the demons, so it wouldn't make sense for them to hang around here any longer and put themselves in further danger. That's why Lloyd wants them to leave the rest for him to handle. Ren objects, but Galilei overrules the objection and grabs her so they can escape. He knows Ren feels like she needs to stay and help, but they would only end up getting in the way of Lloyd. Plus, they already know they are no match for Gazarm, so it's best if they let Lloyd handle it. Meanwhile, the demons are still panicking because they think Gazarm was taken out by Lloyd's blast. But Gazarm then teleports back up to the surface and angrily tells the other demons to go after the Assassin's Guild immediately. They are extremely skilled when it comes to hiding, so if they get away, Gazarm may never be able to find them again. The demons immediately get moving, but Lloyd obviously isn't going to just let them leave, so he fires several more death lasers at them, blasting every demon within the castle grounds. All except Gazarm, who was able to teleport out of harm's way. A couple of demons attempt to get the jump on Lloyd while he is distracted, and Gazarm also seizes the opportunity to use his cursed speech to tell Lloyd to die. Lloyd sees it coming, so he already has a barrier set up to block the attack. However, to his surprise, the spell slits right through his barrier. Now, Lloyd still has a lot of time to react since his brain is on Quicksilver timing, but while dodging seems like the logical thing to do, he is also curious to see what would happen if he just let it hit him. But before he could do anything stupid, Grimm forces him to dodge the cursed word, leading it to collide with one of the demons and kill him immediately. Lloyd uses his analysis magic to see what happened after the spell connected, and it looks like the death spell killed even the demon inhabiting the body, although the death of the body was caused by cardiac arrest. Grimm still wants Lloyd to give up on fighting Gazarm because it is too dangerous. Gazarm's magic doesn't require any spell casting as it takes his mana and directly creates an effect. Much like Crow's cursed speech, but a lot more refined. When using a regular spell, a barrier is able to block the effects created by it, but when the attack comes directly from mana, a barrier basically becomes nothing more than a net, so while solid attacks are blocked, mana can freely flow through. If they were dealing with someone like Pazuzu, then Lloyd could easily overwhelm any attack he could throw at him, but with Gazarm, his mana could actually pierce Lloyd's heart if he's not careful. Gazarm looks down at the demons who managed to survive Lloyd's death rays, and he has nothing but contempt for them. Grimm explains to Lloyd that demons are ranked by 10 classes, so the ones down there must be 10th class demons, which means they are completely trash. For reference, Pazuzu was an 8th class demon and Grimm himself is a 3rd class demon. Lloyd assumes that must mean that Gazarm must be a 1st class demon, but it's actually much worse than that. Gazarm is demon royalty, or in other words, he's a demon lord, so the kind of power he possesses means that even 100 first-class demons wouldn't stand a chance against him. Lloyd may be amazing, but this time, Grimm believes even Lloyd is outmatched, so he wants them to get the hell out of here. But Lloyd keeps flying closer to Gazarm instead. Gazarm asks who Lloyd is, so he introduces him as the seventh prince, and Gazarm seems to recall something from Jade's memories about him wanting to meet Lloyd, but he doesn't care enough to remember all the details. Lloyd says he would have loved to meet Jade, but now he's never going to get the chance to do so because of Gazarm. Gazarm responds, saying he is upset since Lloyd just showed up here and started blasting his minions and base to smithereens. They both have their scores to settle with one another, and they look equally crazy and excited to get things started, but Grim once again suggests that Lloyd should run away while he has still got a chance to escape. Lloyd acknowledges that Gazarm won't be as easy to take out as the one he decimated on the ground, and Grim is shocked that Lloyd would call what he did easy. He may have said 10th class demons are trash, but they are still relatively strong and have a natural resistance to sorcery. Gazarm is eager to get the battle started, so he uses his mana to form a tiny spike, which he then launches straight at Lloyd, nearly breaking through his barrier. Even if it didn't go all the way, this is the first time Grim has ever seen something do actual damage to Lloyd's shield, so he is panicking even more than before. Gazarm is impressed with the durability of the barrier Lloyd created, but let's see how it holds up when he isn't holding back as much. As he launches several mana sword projectiles at Lloyd, Lloyd begins a series of evasive maneuvers to minimize the damage he takes, but he is still losing a lot of his shield layers in the process. However, Lloyd becomes so focused on dodging the swords that he forgot that Gazarm has the ability to teleport, so be surprised when Gazarm appears in front of him and immediately shatters the barrier with a single kick. This sends Lloyd flying straight into the swords, so he thinks fast and casts an earth puppet spell to protect him from being impaled. Galilei and the others are in awe of the scale at which Lloyd and Gazarm are fighting, but so are the demons, until both sides realize they are standing on the same bridge and the demons begin chasing after the assassins. Galilei turns to Babylon, who has been trying to get over the gate for a while now, and asks him to hurry up so they can get past it. While he is doing that, Lloyd is still in the middle of his fight with Gazarm, and Grim is in tears already. But Lloyd doesn't care about his feelings and asks him for his help with something instead. Gazarm is shocked that Lloyd managed to escape his attack completely unharmed, and the only time he was actually able to put pressure on Lloyd was when he used his teleportation ability. Lloyd claps back that the teleportation ability doesn't even belong to Gazarm. Gazarm sees things differently since he stole Jade's body already, and Jade could never control the ability in the first place, so he didn't deserve to have it. Humans aren't able to control abilities like this without the use of a spell, but when it comes to a demon like him who was born as a master of mana, it's easy. So it's only natural that he would take such a wasted gift for himself. And now he is going to show Lloyd what it looks like when teleportation is used correctly in battle. He summons more of those swords and begins mocking Lloyd, wondering if he'll try to attack or dodge the swords, or maybe even run away. But as Lloyd gets stabbed in the back, Gazarm laughs and says he never had a choice to begin with. With teleportation, there is no need to launch projectiles normally, so they can be sent directly into Lloyd's body, and there is no way to counter that. And now that he believes himself to be victorious, he officially names his power Shadow Wolf to commemorate it. Meanwhile, the trash demons are still after the assassins and telling them to give up their bodies, but they just managed to gain control of their powers for the first time in their lives, so there's no way they are going to give that up now. Galilei uses his web ability to cover the ground and hold the demons in place while they escape. These webs will harden after a few seconds, so to make sure none of the demons escape before then, Crow uses his cursed speech to make Humpty Dumpty and the rest all fall. Galilei praises Crow for being able to use his cursed speech well enough to avoid targeting his allies as well, and while the demons are still incapacitated, Babylon finally manages to open the gates and allow them to escape. However, just as they were about to leave, the demons began struggling and ended up ripping the bricks out of the ground so they could stand up. They won't be able to get far unless someone stays behind to keep the demons at bay, but before Galilei can step up to do it himself, Talia takes on the task instead. She looks at all the demons at once, and upon activating her power, she slices her ankle to render all of them unable to walk. She tells everyone else to stay out of the line of sight since she doesn't have enough control to not hurt them as well. She wants them to leave her here and make a break for the woods so they can be safe. Ren doesn't want to go without her since there's no way she'll be able to escape on her own with her leg wounded like that. The demons are in pain from her ability, but at the same time they are able to regenerate the wounds, which in turn also heals Talia. But then she immediately stabs her foot right after, leaving the demons in pain again. She once again asks her allies to hurry and get out of here while they still can. She promises not to let her body get stolen so easily, but Ren can't just accept that and leave, so she tries to grab Talia so they can get out of here together. However, she is pushed back and locked outside the gate by Galilei, while he stays behind with Talia. Even with the gate closed, the demons would be able to break through it in no time, so at this rate, none of them will be able to escape unless the demons are stopped now. He knows what Talia was planning to do, so he is not going to let her kill herself to take out the demons, at least not without a friend by her side. The demons start panicking because they realize Talia is actually crazy enough to kill herself for the sake of taking them out. So they rush to try and stop her, but Galilei gets in their way. Ren pleads with them to stop since they were so close to being able to live together as a family. Jade may never be able to come back, but they can control their powers now, and they won't have bounties on their heads anymore. So why do they need to die? Talia can't imagine the suffering Jade must have went through while trying to end his life for their sake, but she understands the feeling of wanting to do whatever it takes to protect her friends, so she doesn't hesitate to slash her own neck for them. Meanwhile, Gazarm is looking down as the whole thing unfolds, and he feels nothing but disgust at the pitiful existences below him. If anything, he had hoped that Lloyd could have entertained him a bit more, because then maybe Talia's sacrifice could have actually meant something. However, just then, he hears a crumbling sound coming from where Lloyd's corpse should be, so he turns around and sees that Lloyd has broken down into a pile of dust. He is then attacked from behind by the real Lloyd, but he teleports out of the way in time to avoid getting slashed. He realized Lloyd used a decoy to get him to let his guard down, and now he is using an enchanted sword, so it looks like their fight is going to get a lot more interesting from here on out. However, Lloyd seems to be worried about something now, but it has nothing to do with Gazarm, so he asks that they go somewhere else to finish the fight because there are some people here who he really doesn't want to see. Just before Talia was able to end herself, hundreds of fireballs began raining from behind the gate, so Galilei grabs her so she doesn't get caught in it. The demons end up getting scorched, but neither Talia nor Galilei have any idea where the attacks could have come from. Just then, the gate is sliced up and Lloyd's family walk in. Albert stands at the front and things are definitely a lot more chaotic than he was expecting, but that doesn't change anything since they are all here for the sole purpose of rescuing Lloyd. While Ren is happy that backup has arrived, both Albert and Silpha have murder in their eyes and immediately go after them. There may be a horde of demons nearby, but dealing with the people who kidnapped Lloyd comes first, so Silpha stands over them with her sword and questions them on Lloyd's whereabouts. She also threatens to kill one of them if they stay silent or start lying for any reason. Because of this, Galilei frantically starts blurting out answers, saying Lloyd is fighting inside the Lord's castle. Albert further questions why Lloyd would be fighting someone and with whom it may be, so Ren is about to explain everything that happened up to this point, but Babylon stops her. Before they got here, Lloyd had asked them all to make a promise, even though he didn't think the situation was likely to happen in the first place. He asked that if the Assassin's Guild bumps into any of the people from his castle by chance, then they should do everything in their power to not reveal anything about his strength or Grimm's existence to them. Galilei and the others had no problem keeping his secret, but they wondered why Lloyd would be so insistent about not letting anyone know about his power. While Lloyd was about to fall asleep, he mentioned how he doesn't want to get saddled with a lot of annoying responsibilities once people realize he is strong, so he'd rather keep a mediocre persona, so that he can continue with his magic studies undisturbed. He sounded like it was a really important secret to him, so they can't let Albert and the others find out about his fight with the Demon Lord. Besides, even if they did find out, they would just try to help Lloyd and get in his way, but they still need to figure out what to say. Time's up, so Silpha is about ready to chop someone's head off. But before she does, Ren comes up with something to say and tells Silpha that Lloyd is fighting a total loser. That's nice, but Silpha ain't buying it, so she gets ready to chop Ren's head off. However, Albert stops her, so the others think he must be sticking up for them because he believes in diplomacy. But in reality, he just didn't like the idea of Silpha killing the child in the group first, so he tells her to start with one of the adults instead. Albert has no mercy to offer to the people who stripped Lloyd of his underwear. Galilei realizes that there must have been some sort of misunderstanding here, so he explains that he didn't strip Lloyd of his clothes at all. They just got covered in his sticky fluid, so he hung them out to dry. Yeah, Galilei isn't helping his case right now, so Ren tries to appeal to them once more and explains that even if Albert and Silpha may not believe people from the Assassin's Guild, they are still worried about Lloyd as well. Albert and the others showing up here save Talia and Galilei from having to sacrifice their lives, so Ren is deeply grateful to them for it. And if they think it is necessary, she will accept whatever punishment they choose. But the demons took Jade from her, a member of her family, and that's why Lloyd is fighting for them. Silpha still doesn't seem to care, but as a demon attempts to sneak up on Ren, it gets stopped by Elise and Liru. Elise says she thinks they can trust what Ren just said because of nothing else. Liru would already gobbled her up if she actually had any bad intentions. Albert agrees to put faith in Elise's instincts for now, but he still doesn't trust the Assassin's Guild yet. Since they are putting a hold on their aggression towards the Assassin's Guild, they now need to deal with the horde of demons who have all regenerated from the damage of the initial fireball. They won't have time to take care of this and find Lloyd, so Albert asks Silpha to go ahead and look for Lloyd first, while the rest of them handle the demons. Ren realizes that Silpha finding Lloyd would be really bad since she would just make herself a target for Gazarm, so Ren holds her back and tries to make up an excuse as to why she can't go. Nothing she says would stop Silpha though, so Silpha was ready to slash Ren to let her go, but just then, dozens of Gazarm's spears rain down from above. Silpha isn't sure what happened, but those spears cause the bridge to collapse, so Silpha can't cross anymore to get to Lloyd. Even worse, all the demons on the bridge have fallen into the water and are now swimming to the other side of the river, and it would be really bad if they managed to get behind everyone since that would have them trapped on the bridge with nowhere to go. That's why Albert immediately calls for everyone to head back over to the river banks. While they are retreating to face the lesser demons, we see Lloyd and Gazarm flying over the castle, and Gazarm only destroyed the bridge because Lloyd asked him to so the others couldn't interrupt their fight. Gazarm finds the way he feels to be strange since normally he would have popped down there to massacre all the humans, but right now the only thing he can think of is fighting Lloyd. He uses teleportation to try to hit Lloyd with some spears, but Lloyd saw it coming and dashed out of the way to save himself. Grim reminds Lloyd that he can't afford to get distracted for even a second when he is up against someone like Gazarm, but then he notices something strange about the sword Lloyd is holding. Meanwhile, Albert and his soldiers are engaged in combat with the demons and are using their enchanted swords to keep them at bay. It looks like Lloyd won't have to worry about helping them since they look like they can handle it on their own, which means he is free to focus all his attention on battling Gazarm. The demons on the ground are in a great deal of pain over the damage the fire is doing to them, and while they are still magic resistant, Albert can see that it still has some effect on them. What he's really worried about is how he's going to handle the regenerating bodies of the demons. Diane uses his own magic sword, which has a lot more firepower, but even that proves to be incapable of taking out all the demons. At this rate, they will end up losing since the magic swords still use up the wielder's magic when a spell is cast, and the soldiers are running out of steam already. And if they continue blasting away like this, then Silpha and Liru won't be able to get in close to fight. Albert agrees with Diane and tries to think of a way to arrange things so that Silpha and Liru can get in close, but then he realizes that Silpha isn't here anymore. At the same time, Silpha is getting ready to jump off the edge of the bridge with Shiro to make it to the other side, while the Assassin's Guild tries to get her to reconsider. In the first place, there is no way Shiro would be able to make that kind of jump, but in Shiro's doggy brain, he would do anything it takes to make sure he can see Lloyd again, so he jumps. Shiro doesn't make it very far before he ends up plummeting into the river, but after seeing the giant dog fail to jump, Silpha still intends to try and jump the gap herself anyway. However, before she can do that, the Humpty Dumpty demon climbs back up the bridge and attacks her. Silpha is able to counter the surprise attack with her swords, so the demon commends her for her skill, but he has some bad news for her. While the other demons may be 10th class, he is actually an 8th class demon, and not only that, he is also a practitioner of the supreme swords of the Netherworld, so she stands no chance against him. Silpha doesn't really know how strong an 8th class demon is meant to be, so she isn't worried about it. Meanwhile, back on the river banks, Albert is still worried about fighting the demons since it is clear that they have stolen the bodies of the citizens of Lodost, so he is hesitant to finish them off because he wishes to save the innocent people's lives. While he is distracted, a demon manages to sneak up behind him, but before Albert is attacked, the demon gets its neck broken by Babylon. Albert appreciates Babylon saving his life, but he is a little shaken by how little hesitation there was from Babylon in taking that person's life. The demon is struggling to regenerate itself, and Babylon tells Albert that he is a nice guy, kind of like Jade was. He wants him to know that even though he is an assassin, he still doesn't take lives lightly, and the reason he didn't hesitate was because the people the demons are possessing aren't savable. If it is anything like what Gazarm did to Jade, then their minds are long gone already, and the only thing left to do is make sure the demons that caused this die as well. Albert appreciates the words of advice, so he now has the resolve to do what must be done. He goes over to the citizens of Lodost who have been possessed and apologizes for being too late to stop this from happening to them, but he is going to avenge their deaths and cast Inferno Rain upon the demons. He orders his men to show no mercy either because they are fighting to avenge their already fallen neighbors. Meanwhile, back on the bridge, Silpha is still engaged in battle with the demon, and their battle seems to be evenly matched since neither of their sword styles are making much headway. Once the clash ends, Silpha has received a cut on her forehead, and the demon has the same injury, although in his case he can just heal himself. If Silpha isn't able to finish him off in a single blow, then the demon will just keep regenerating over and over, and even worse, the demon now says that it wants to take over Silpha's body as well so that it can take her sword skills and make them his own. Just like he did with the Lordo's fighting style as he uses it to attack Silpha. The demon explains that he is able to acquire the skills of the body that it takes over, and this body seems to have been a particularly skilled swordsman. The demon also remembers the body's owner wearing a wedding ring or something, but he threw it out since it was getting in the way. He can only imagine the life that the guy must have lived, but now none of that matters anymore since a body is nothing more than clothing to demons like him. And he plans to make Silpha the latest addition to his set so he can wear her out completely. Silpha is tired of listening to his rant, so since he enjoys stealing things so much, she gives him a taste of his own medicine and copies his demon blade form from earlier. The demon is shocked that Silpha is able to use the demon blade all of a sudden, but she just learned it by watching him. So she mocks him for not being able to copy a technique without using the body of a human. She then calls for Shiro, who had managed to climb back up the bridge, but the demon doesn't think Silpha fighting with an overgrown dog is going to help her chances of victory at all. However, Shiro isn't here to assist in battle. He is just acting as Silpha's inventory, so after a bit of searching, she's able to find the sword Lloyd had made for her. He didn't inscribe any flashy spells on it, and instead made it so that the sword would be as strong and flexible as possible so that Silpha would be able to use her full power with it to cut down a demon. Demons may be psychic entities, but they still need physical bodies to do stuff, which is why they either construct their own or take over another being's body. But in doing so, the damage taken by the body is felt by the demon, so a fatal blow would be enough to defeat one. The only issue is that a body that is under the control of a demon requires a serious amount of damage to be killed, and even that damage can be regenerated in an instant if it isn't immediately fatal, so one needs to strike the demon down with a single, really powerful attack. She asks Lloyd why he specifically chose strength and flexibility enchantments for her, so Lloyd explains that whenever he sees her swing her sword, it looks like she's holding back, so he thought she might be worried about her sword breaking in the middle of her strike. Silpha was incredibly happy that Lloyd would pay that kind of attention to her, so she promises to cherish the sword and use it well. She initially wanted to name it after Lloyd, but she believed it would be more fitting to name the sword after her recent failure in defeating Pazuzu. She vowed to never again disappoint Lloyd as she did on that day, which is why the sword will be named Demonbane. The demon mocks her for giving her sword such a fantastical name when she, along with the entire country, are still bound to lose to him anyway. The future will be a nightmarish onslaught for no real reason other than for the amusement of the demons. The plan was initially concocted just to lure Jade out of hiding, so once the demons took over these bodies, they began stirring up threats of war so that Jade would be forced to return home to stop it. The Assassin's Guild is enraged that the demons were behind everything from the start and used Jade's hatred of war against him, so Ren charges forward in a blind fury. Although she would only get in the way, so Silpha knocks her out and says they don't need to worry because the demon's plans will not come to pass. The demon is still confident that it is superior, so he plans to finish this, the ultimate technique of his demon blade form. However, before he could do that, Silpha had already sliced through him with pristine efficiency. Back before Jade had been completely taken over by Guzarm, he was a shattered shell of his former self, and Guzarm enjoyed nothing more than to mock Jade for his shortcomings, telling him to just accept his death again. In a final act of defiance, Jade told Guzarm that he was never going to get away with his plan because he will be stopped, but soon after he ended up dying, so Guzarm took full control of his body. Guzarm wondered what Jade's final plan was to stop him. He can use Jade's powers and he has full access to Jade's memories about his friends, but there was also something deeper in there that he couldn't see. It's strange, but Guzarm decided to ignore it since he already has what he came for. As long as he possesses Jade's body, nothing can stop him, and now that he has accomplished his first goal, since Jade was terrified of war, he plans to start a massive war as a final middle finger to Jade. Back to the present, Silpha had just finished off the demon, and afterward, she approaches the corpse to pay her respects. She can tell that the man who was possessed had been a swordsman of great regard, so she would have loved to have fought the real him under different circumstances. Silpha notices that the Assassin's Guild are in tears, so she asks if they knew the Eggman when he was still alive, but that's not the case. They just think the way his life ended is really sad, but he must be happy to have his body freed. Silpha tells them all that they aren't cut out to be assassins if they are crying over just one dead person, but she is then surprised by a sudden blast of steam from behind. None of them know what's going on, but as they look down at the river, they realize that the entire thing has been evaporated. Meanwhile, over on Lloyd's end, he complains about all the steam ruining his line of sight, so he's regretting the decision he made a moment ago. While Guzarm was still chasing him down with his mana spears, Lloyd was trying to think of a better way to handle these attacks since he couldn't just keep running forever. The first thing he had to deal with was the mana spears, and they may come in a lot of different patterns, but they are all fundamentally the same and can pierce through his barriers with ease. If he gets hit with one, it would mean instant death, but it shouldn't be a problem since his heavy-duty barrier is able to block them. The next thing he needs to worry about is the cursed speech that Gezarim uses since his barriers can't block it. It is also an instant death attack, but it travels slowly since it's just sound. But Gezarim can use his mana spears to speed them up. The only way to counter this is to block the spears and take evasive maneuvers to avoid the cursed speech, but there's one last thing he needs to be careful about. Gezarim's Shadow Wolf attack is instantaneous, so it basically requires Lloyd to moving at high speeds all the time, as if he slows down for even 2 seconds. Gezarim can pin his location and teleport spears there. And if Lloyd's predictions are correct, Gezarim is bound to go on an all-out offensive attack. They'll keep blasting away while waiting for Lloyd's stamina to run out. It's annoying to deal with, and so annoying in fact that Lloyd decides to go on the offensive as well by casting a spell faster than the 2-second time frame Gezarim needs to use Shadow Wolf. In a second, Lloyd was able to cast a humongous fire spell, but as it was hurtling towards Gezarim, he just teleported out of the way, leaving the fire spell to hit the water, and that's how the river ended up being evaporated. Since Lloyd can't see anything, he has to use his chi technique to scan the entire area at all times, as Gezarim can teleport anywhere, anytime. It's really annoying to have to constantly scan, but Lloyd is able to find Gezarim below him, although he doesn't know what he is doing. Grim reminds Lloyd that he needs to keep moving so that he doesn't get hit with Shadow Wolf, so Lloyd starts moving. Then he realizes that he was floating perfectly still for way more than 5 seconds back there, so why didn't Gezarim attack at all? That also raises the question of what means Gezarim uses to locate Lloyd in the first place. He was able to send a letter to the Assassin's Guild base from a long distance away, but that may just be because he knew the location from Jade's memories. Lloyd remembers him saying he wouldn't be able to find the Assassin's Guild again if they went into hiding, so that leads Lloyd to the conclusion that Gezarim must be using his line of sight to aim his teleportation. And if that's the case, then all this steam works out really well in Lloyd's favor. Lloyd stops moving again, and just as he has predicted, Gezarim doesn't attack him. He explains to Grim that Gezarim needs to be able to see them in order to attack. So Lloyd would like to get in close enough to land a blow with his sword, but Gezarim is bound to notice if Lloyd does something like that, so he thinks of a good strategy. Meanwhile, below, Gezarim thinks about how he wasn't expecting Lloyd to do something like evaporate the river, but even if he can't see anything. Now, if he waits long enough, the fog will be gone. Just then, Lloyd lunges at him with an attack, and Gezarim notices him, but there are a ton of Lloyd copies, so he doesn't know which one is really him. But it doesn't matter since he just lets them all strike him, and then he figures out which one is the real Lloyd because one of them has a sword that is made out of real metal. He then strikes that Lloyd down and begins healing himself, commending Lloyd for such a decent plan of attack, but it was foolish to risk putting his real body in harm's way for it. Physical attacks normally work on demons, but with Gezarim, even if you crush his heart or pulverize his brain, he'll be able to regenerate it in an instant. That is why Jade was unable to end his life, and on top of that, Gezarim can harden his body at will, so he just let the swords penetrate his body so that he could identify the real Lloyd. Even so, he tells Lloyd that he can be proud of himself in the afterlife for managing to touch someone like Gezarim. But that aside, Gezarim starts wondering how long it's going to take for the Lloyd clones to disappear. Just then, he realizes that the Lloyd that he killed was also a clone, meaning the real Lloyd is still somewhere nearby. He starts trying to figure out where Lloyd could possibly be, and he comes to the conclusion that he must be above him. But he was dead wrong, since as soon as he looks up, a real Lloyd blasts him with a point-blank inferno, and immediately after, Lloyd fades back into the crowd of his clones. It's a makeshift plan, but he thinks it's working out pretty well. Gezarim uses teleportation to change his clothes, and this is a perfect example of how he can use teleportation without a clear line of sight. He can teleport anything as long as he knows the exact locations involved, but he can't teleport things to locations he is unsure about, so Lloyd's clones ruin his ability to use Shadow Wolf here. However, it's not like he doesn't have options available to get rid of the clones, like just attacking at random for instance. The clones are being destroyed one by one, and as soon as one defends itself with a barrier, Jade immediately teleports behind it and crushes its head. He had thought this was the real Lloyd because of the barrier, but as he opens his hand, all he finds is a lump of rock. He realizes that Lloyd must have placed barriers on some of the puppets to trick him, but now he's not sure if all the ones with barriers are puppets or not. It would be crazy for Lloyd to run around in this hail of spears without a barrier, but whatever the case may be, Gezarim is really enjoying himself with this fight. Meanwhile, Lloyd is currently trying to sneak up behind Gezarim by using a concealment spell, and he really doesn't have a barrier on him. The reason he is taking such a huge risk to defeat Gazarm is because his special sword makes the gamble worth it. The sword is one that Lloyd enchanted with spell taking, and as the name suggests, it can be used to absorb a spell and either use the mana to boost the user's strength or analyze the spell. So Lloyd is currently trying to use it to decipher the teleportation magic. Lloyd slashes the teleportation spell, and Gazarm is get to figure out that Lloyd is using a concealment spell, so he is able to begin analyzing the spell. In the process, he enters a mindscape where he starts looking for any signs of Jade still being alive, but all he finds is a large wall of magic scripts representing Jade's will, and upon seeing it, Lloyd says he understands now. Lloyd proceeds to destroy all of his puppets and undo his concealment to face Gazarm, and Gazarm assumes this must mean Lloyd has given up on trying to win, but he's curious to know why Lloyd is fighting in the first place. Gazarm knows he isn't the type of person to care about people or morality, so he makes an offer to have Lloyd join him so they can have fun and wreak havoc across the world. Lloyd rejects the offer, but he offers an explanation as to why he is fighting. Gazarm was born strong, so he has never had to really work hard to overcome adversity. However, adversity is all humans know. Every spell that exists is a result of a dream of a human, meaning sorcery is infinitely interesting, unlike Gazarm. Gazarm didn't bother listening to Lloyd's speech, but since his answer is no, he plans to just finish him off. However, when he teleports this time, Lloyd immediately punches him in the gut and has Gazarm writhing in pain. The punch Lloyd delivered just now was ki-powered, although he wouldn't expect Gazarm to know what that is. Lloyd goes on to say that sorcerers like him learn from all sorts of different sources, so he is waiting for Gazarm to show him something new. His mana spears and cursed speech are things Lloyd has dealt with before, so it's been getting rather boring for Lloyd. Looking at Lloyd reminds Gazarm of how confident Jade was that he would lose, so he is enraged and tries another teleportation attack, but he just gets back kicked away. Lloyd then follows it up with several more attacks, but no matter where Gazarm teleports to, Lloyd is always right on top of him to kick his face in. He has no idea how Lloyd is managing to keep track of him, and things aren't getting better for him anytime soon as Lloyd double casts a hail of fire blasts at Gazarm. He is shot through the wall and Lloyd kicks him down towards the pit of lava that was formed, and even for a demon, swimming in lava would be dangerous, so he tries to teleport out of there, but Lloyd is there to meet him every step of the way, and it looks like Gazarm is out of tricks to pull. Lloyd isn't having any fun, so he says he's going to have to kill Gazarm now, but it appears Gazarm has one last card to play. As a demon lord, he has the ability to control atmospheric mana, so he begins condensing all the mana in the area into a dark mass that will destroy anything it comes into contact with. An ultimate move Gazarm calls the Mortal Dark Sphere. Gazarm throws the Dark Sphere at Lloyd, but Lloyd doesn't seem all that impressed, so he just raises his hand and makes it go poof. Gazarm can't believe what just happened to his ultimate technique, so he demands an explanation from Lloyd, but there's not much to explain. Lloyd just nullified it by using the same technique. Gazarm doesn't believe a human like Lloyd would be capable of using such a powerful spell, but Lloyd proves it by doing it right in front of him. A few years ago, he learned this spell while reading all the magic books he had at his disposal, and after a night of blowing up mountains with it, Lloyd started wondering what would happen if he used 2 copies of the spell at once. So to satiate his curiosity, he set up a ton of the spells and had them collide with one another. Gazarm still can't believe Lloyd could do something like that, since using that spell even once consumes an ungodly amount of mana, but when Lloyd made them collide, they just went poof and fizzled out. So if he had to describe the way he felt about it, he was just as disappointed as he is now that he knows Gazarm has nothing more to show him. Gazarm goes on a rant about how a mere mortal shouldn't speak so disrespectfully towards him, but Lloyd wasn't paying attention to him because he had to sneeze. Gazarm finds this even more insulting, so he teleports behind Lloyd and grabs his head, but he immediately regrets doing so as he gets a first-hand taste of the real power Lloyd possesses. While Gazarm is frozen in terror, Lloyd says there's just one more thing he wants to find out, and that's if the Void spell is capable of killing a demon like him. He summons several Void spells at once and has them all close in on Gazarm. He tries to teleport away, but since Lloyd knows exactly how to keep track of the teleportation, he is still able to hit Gazarm. Back to the others on the ground, due to all the fog, the demons aren't able to see anything, but Leru, Shiro, and Silpha are still able to fight thanks to their keen sense of smell. While she is cutting down the demons, she finds it strange how the demons seem to be weaker than they were earlier, but Ren tells her it's because of her poison, and she is doing her best to only target the demons, but her control isn't the best, so Silpha should be careful not to take too many deep breaths. Albert isn't able to do much since he can't see, so he's hoping the sun will rise soon so there can be some amount of visibility, but when he checks his watch, he is shocked to find out that it's actually morning already. Yet the sky is still dark for some reason. High up above the castle, the surrounding area is still darkened by Lloyd's mana, and Gizarm is being sucked into the void spell Lloyd had cast, and no amount of regeneration is going to save him. Since he will die if things keep going like this, he decides to abandon the body and flee, but Jade's body bites down and won't let him get away. Gizarm is out of options, so he starts trying to play mind games and bait Lloyd into letting him go by pretending to be Jade, but Lloyd is too smart for that and doubles down on the spell to crush Gizarm and finish him off once and for all. Once Lloyd is sure Gizarm is dead, Lloyd conceals his mana once more and daylight finally shines. As Ren looks up into the sky, she has a flashback to a time when Jade told them about Lloyd. He had heard rumors about the 7th Prince of Saloon, and while Lloyd wasn't in contention for the throne, there were a lot of interesting stories about him. Like the fact that there was a huge explosion on the day he was born. The castle tried to cover it up by saying it was just a gender reveal party gone wrong, but Jade heard it was actually Lloyd casting a spell as soon as he was born. The others found it hard to believe, but Jade still thought it was a cool story. If there really was someone gifted enough to use magic right from birth, then maybe Lloyd could someday help them get rid of their curses and live in the light of day again. At the time, it was just a joke to them, but they never could have imagined it would actually come true. After everything was settled, Lloyd and Grimm worked together to build a memorial for Jade, but Grimm asks if it's really okay for it to be so far away from all the other ones. Lloyd thinks it's fitting since there's no body to be buried anyway, and this is more so to remember him. Grimm changes the subject and remarks that he is really impressed by how Lloyd was able to hit Gizarm with the Void spell when it moves pretty slowly. Lloyd explains that it's only because he was able to analyze the teleportation to figure out when it was about to be used, and from there it was just a matter of linking it to his reflexes, so he could automatically dodge when an attack was sent his way and pursue Gizarm anytime he attempted to escape. However, that doesn't mean the fight was easy for him since Gizarm was definitely strong and could have actually killed him if Lloyd slipped up even once. It was honestly a reckless idea to try and analyze the teleportation in the middle of the fight, but he needed to do it to be able to land a hit on Gizarm, and more than anything, he wouldn't have been satisfied if he didn't figure out how teleportation worked at some point. Yet he can't even say he was the one who figured it out since it was already laid out perfectly for him. In his final moments, Jade had transcribed the spell for teleportation and left it there knowing someone would come around to fulfill his wish of killing Gizarm. So the one who really saved the day was Jade. A while later, Albert shows up and asks who the grave is meant to be for, and Lloyd doesn't know how to explain himself, but Albert says he already knows it is a grave that belongs to the former leader of the Assassin's Guild and the previous ruler of Lordos, Jade. The Assassin's Guild told him that they heard about Jade's revolt, so they asked for Lloyd's help. Lloyd just plays along with it since the Assassin's Guild made the story to cover for him, and according to what they told Albert, Lloyd helped defeat the demon that was possessing Jade's body, but even if their intentions and ambitions were pure, they still made a living for themselves by killing up till now, and they essentially kidnapped a member of the royal family to have him help them in a war. All these are severe charges and could be grounds for execution, but they say they are willing to atone for their sins by serving Lloyd for the rest of their lives, and they are serious about it, so Albert just has one question for Lloyd. This isn't going to be like taking in a pet or something. If he agrees to have the Assassin's Guild become his retainers, then any actions they take will become his responsibility, and he will be held accountable for any harm caused. Lloyd tells him he understands and is willing to take responsibility for the Assassin's Guild from now on. This is the first time any of them have seen Lloyd take such an active interest in caring about others, so Albert reminds him that just because he's the 7th prince doesn't mean that people don't care about him or what he does. Because aside from being a prince, he is first and foremost Albert's adorable little brother, and he will always love him. Maybe a little too much though. Just then, Tao comes running in as she had heard about Lloyd being in trouble and ran all the way here, but then she realizes she already missed all the action, so she feels embarrassed and turns around to leave. Albert chases after her since he never got the chance to thank her properly for last time, so everyone leaves to follow him. Once they are alone, Grimm says he's surprised Lloyd actually has such a soft side to himself, but Lloyd denies any sentimentality and says he is just taking in the Assassin's Guild because they possess special mana, and that brings new magical discoveries. But Grimm knows he cares about them, otherwise he would have bothered making a grave for Jade. The Assassin's Guild members are eventually released since Lloyd said he would take responsibility for them, and they promise to serve him with everything that got to repay the kindness he has shown them. After that, Albert decides to hold a tea party since Tao had asked for one a while ago, but now that it's happening, she feels a little nervous since this tea party has half the royal family here. Albert tells her that there's no need to worry about formalities since this is meant to be a celebration, so everyone should just focus on having fun. In that case, Tao is fine with letting loose, but Silpha still doesn't like her, so she intentionally spills tea on Tao, and they start fighting over it. Albert also tells the Assassin's Guild that there's no reason to hold themselves back either since he knows they prefer more casual parties, so they happily get loud and drunk in honor of Jade. In the middle of it all, Crow starts crying over Jade's grave along with Tao, who didn't know him, but she can sense that he was hot. And Talia tries to make a move on Albert and get him to have a drink with her, but he refuses since he never drinks while he's on official business. However, Talia doesn't give up, so since Albert refuses to get drunk, she uses her powers to share her feeling of drunkenness with him. However, Albert is the kind of person to get angry when he is drunk, so he immediately targets Galila since he still hasn't gotten an explanation on how Lloyd got covered in his sticky fluid. While that's going on, the other girls are all over by the castle river since all the heat Lloyd generated turned it into a hot spring. While there, Ren turns to Silpha and asks for permission to serve as Lloyd's maid just like her. But Silpha doesn't really have the authority to grant her request, so she tells Ren to ask Lloyd directly. Lloyd is right above Silpha, and he says it's fine, but Ren wasn't expecting him to be here. Ren asks if Lloyd is really okay with having a poison-blighted person like her by his side, but he tells her she still has a lot to work on. For instance, she shouldn't call herself blighted anymore since once she gains proper control over her mana, she will be able to control what kind of poison she makes, and she could become a great pharmacist with a power like that. That's when Ren realizes that despite her power being terribly deadly, Lloyd has never once considered her to be a danger, so she promises to serve him with everything she has. After that, they all return to the Sullen Castle where Ren has become Lloyd's maid alongside Silpha. And after they get Lloyd dressed for the day, he has to meet with his father to explain everything that happened in Lordost, but he really doesn't want to receive any credit for it. And luckily, Albert did him a favor and took most of the credit, so Lloyd is still free to do whatever he wants, and that means he can continue studying magic as much as he wants. This was the end of Season 1. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more anime recaps.